Hello friends. This is the Ani Fanfics. How are you all? So we are back with an amazing movie on What If Naruto Summoned the Master of Wolf Clan. Here's a summary.
What if things went differently on the night of Naruto's birth? Minato might have put the safety and security of the village above that of his family, but what if Kushina Uzumaki did not? Where will this new path take Naruto and how will they shape the events to come?
But before we begin, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin.
In the village hidden in the leaves, with Minato Namikaze. Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage and leader of the village hidden in the leaves, was having a distinctly mixed day. The day had started out fine, just like any other. That was until Kushina Uzumaki, his secretly pregnant wife, had gone into labor, and October 10th had gone from a day like any other to a wonderful day, a day he would never forget, the day he became a father to his precious son, Naruto. That had been the good part of his day. The bad part. Well, the bad part of his day came in the form of some masked shinobi claiming to be Madara Uchiha, a legendary and supposedly dead shinobi from the Leaf Village, who had not only found out that Kushina had gone into labor, but had also found the secret, Anbu-guarded cave where his son was born, a supposedly safe place where young Naruto could be brought into the world without Minato and Kushina's many enemies finding out. Somehow this person claiming to be Madara Uchiha had not only gotten past the Anbu guards, all of them elite shinobi,
but he had also killed Minato's predecessor, Hiruzen Sarutobi's wife, who was acting as Kushina's midwife. He had then kidnapped his son, a distraction he had used to lure Minato away from the tired and weakened Kushina. As Minato had gone to rescue Naruto, the masked man had taken Kushina. Taking advantage of her weakened state, he had released the nine-tailed demon fox, a power and deadly entity called a Biju which had previously been sealed inside Kushina.
With the 9 tails released, the masked man had then gone on to unleash it in the middle of the Leaf Village, causing untold damage as the demon fox rampaged through the village, killing and maiming hundreds. The masked man had then turned to manage to escape for Minato, just when the 4th Hokage had had him too. If Minato lived through today, a feat getting less and less likely considering that despite the masked man having escaped, the 9 tails still ran amok, he would forever look upon October the 10th with mixed feelings. However, Minato had to prioritize, and right now the biggest priority was dealing with the 9 tails. The beast had so many legends spread about it and its fearsome power, and as far as he could see it lived up to every single one.
Killing this kind of beast was beyond even the first Hokage, one of the most legendary and powerful shinobi to have ever existed, as such it was definitely beyond his own skills. But while Minato might not have the tailed beast suppressing wood style that the first Hokage had, he did have something the first didn't. Minato was a master at sealing. All he had to do was keep the 9 tails occupied long enough for him to finish his preparations to seal the beast away.
Minato glanced warily at the 9 raging tails which easily tore through anything that got in their way, giving up any hope of holding the nin tails down himself. Minato instead bit his thumb and rapidly ran through a number of the hand signs. He jumped above the 9 tails and slammed his palm down. And in a puff of smoke the great beast was gone. Not quite gone yet, Minato reminded himself. Using the flying thunder god on 2 targets of such size was straining even for him. And he still had to get Kushina and the container for the 9 tails. Gamabunta, I need you to hold this thing down while I prepare the seal, Minato shouted as he turned to look over at his colossal summon from the Toad clan, one of the most powerful of the many summoning clans there were in existence. No promises, I might finish him off before you get back. Gamabunta, the large chief of the Toads, replied. As it turned out, the new chief, despite standing at close to 50 feet tall, still had a lot of growing to do, mentally. In the scarce minute that Minato was gone, the 9 tails had managed to slice his stomach despite the Toad playing a careful defense. Any wounds inflicted by the Toad's blade seemed to disappear within seconds. Gamabunta stuck to firing off water bullets from a distance after almost having his guts spilled over the forest. Minato returned, now with a small crying baby and his dying wife. Landing on the ground near to Gamabunta, Minato carefully laid both his son and wife down, before he got to work on setting up and drawing the sealing matrix he would need to stop the 9 tails.
With Kushina, as Minato got to work, the dying Kushina looked over and made to protest. Knowing as she did that Minato was going to seal the 9 tails in their son Naruto, making him the new Jinchuriki of the 9 tails, an act that would no doubt cost Minato his life and leave Naruto alone. Living in the village containing within him the monster that had caused so much destruction and death this night, she knew now that things wouldn't end well. Still, though, she knew the Nine Tails had to be stopped, just as she knew Minato would forge on regardless. For all she loved the man, she knew he would put the well-being of the village over that of himself, Kushina and their son. This is why, instead of wasting her strength protesting, she instead began to make her own plans. Drawing on her diminished chakra, an act that caused her unimaginable pain due to the damage the Nine Tails release had caused. Kushina slowly began to go through her own plan to make sure her son would be safe and protected. Minato's actions were not just noticed by Gamabunta and Kushina though, the Nine Tails also seemed to realize what Into was up to, showing a surprising amount of intelligence for what many thought was just a raging, monstrous beast. Roaring in anger, the Nine Tails began to charge towards their position, tearing through buildings and shinobi as it forged onwards, attempting as it did so to interrupt the ceiling. With Gamabunta the leader of the Toad Summons, Minato shouted something as he saw the Nine Tails charge, and though it was drowned out by the Nine Tails' fury, Gamabunta could guess what it was he had to do. Just as the Nine Tails neared him, the Toad leapt into the air and stabbed the Nine Tails' reaching paw into the ground with his sword. Minato finished whatever he had been doing, a large sealing matrix now being present on the baby Naruto's stomach. What happened next almost made the blood in Gamabunta's veins freeze as he suddenly felt the pressing feeling of death overtake the area. The Nine Tails roared again, not in rage this time, but something more akin to fear or annoyance. Then the beast shrunk. Gamabunta couldn't find any other way to explain it.
The Nine Tails went from a healthy-looking, if enormous and nine-tailed, fox to a scrawny, laughable facsimile of the terrifying beast it was.
But the Nine Tails was anything but weak, even in its diluted state.
Gamabunta's eyes widened as the Nine Tails lunged forward with its claws, threatening to impale what Gamabunta presumed was the new Jinchuriki.
Seeing this, Gamabunta threw himself forward, intercepting the Nine Tails as he did so. Gamabunta succeeded in defending his summoner and his family from the nine-tailed fox, but Dongsa had caused him to suffer serious damage as one of the Nine Tails' claws nearly tore out his eye, and several of its tails impaled his body. The damage ended up being too much, so much so that Gamabunta knew he would need to return to his summoning realm Mount Myobokuzan in order to recover.
Just before he did return to his summoning realm though, Gamabunta saw another unfamiliar summon appear.
He only saw it for an instant, but the summon was Huge Wolf, with sleek silver fur and piercing amber eyes. Upon appearing, the summon leapt towards the charging nine-tailed fox, its fangs bared as it smashed into the diminished Nine Tails, sending it staggering backwards. The feeling of death came on seemingly twice as strong as before, and the Nine Tails roared in absolute fury as it began to be entirely sealed into the newborn baby. The last thing Gamabunta saw before he returned to his summoning realm was Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash, the fourth Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves, fall to the forest floor alongside his wife, Kushina Uzumaki. His summoner dead, Gamabunta returned to. His last image before he disappeared was that of the large silver wolf glancing at him for a moment before it too vanished in a cloud of smoke. In the Black Forest, with Aquila the leader of the wolf summons.
Aquila silently appeared in the center of a colossal forest which was filled with trees almost 100 feet high.
This was the Black Forest, the home to the Direwolf clan, one of the many summoning clans in existence. Prowling forward, Aquila began to make her way deeper into the forest, her amber eyes gleaming in the darkened forest. Her heightened sense picking up the scent and sound of all the prey that scurried around her. Not the Aquila was interesting in hunting right now. No, instead she began to make her way through the huge forest, heading for the spot that the Direwolf clan called home.
It did not take long for Aquila to reach it, a massive clearing in the center of the forest which was nearly a mile in diameter and was covered with dozens of large rocky outcrops. As she entered the clearing, she quickly drew the attention of the rest of her pack. There were nearly 30 of them in total, a small number when compared with other summoning clans, but they made up for it with ferocity and power.
Aquila, what news of our summoner? What news of Kushina? Fenrir, her mate and a large gray direwolf that stood at almost 20 feet tall, said as he moved forward. Around him the other wolves began to pay attention, some of them shifting around so they were partially sat up as they looked over at their leader curiously.
Kushina is dead. Aquila replied bluntly, not seeing the need to sugarcoat things.
Before any of the others could speak, she continued on, not giving them the chance. Something went wrong with the pregnancy and the nine tails escaped. Her mate, Minato, gave up his life to save the village hidden in the leaves by sealing the beast inside Kushina's son, Naruto. Kushina was dying when she summoned me. All she asked was that I save her son and raised him like he was my own, away from any of the prejudice he might face as a Jinchuriki.
So she has become one with the eternal hunt. Fenrir spoke up, his tone soft as he mentioned the afterlife the direwolves believed in. It is a shame, she was a strong fighter and a good woman.
She was, and as such I agreed to her request and brought her son Naruto back with me. Akila replied, shifting slightly as shifted her head back, gently pulling the now sleeping baby Naruto from where he had been previously nestled safely and comfortably in her fur. Before she lay the sleeping babe gently on the ground in front of her, in full view of the pack.
Looking down at the sleeping baby, Fenrir's golden eyes narrowed slightly before. We will raise the boy as Kushina asked, but if he is to be one of the pack, then he will be treated like any other pup.
I agree, Akila replied before she closed her eyes, drawing on her chakra as she shifted her form. Her body shifted, becoming more anthropomorphic as she reared up so she was now standing on two legs, her clawed hands at her side as she shrank down from her usual 30-foot-tall four-legged form, to her 9-foot-tall two-legged form. Standing at 9 foot tall, with sleek silver fur, clawed hands and feet and a lupine head, Akila stretched uncomfortably. This secondary form that direwolves were capable of taking, was not a form she enjoyed, but it would make dealing with the baby easier. As soon as he grew up though she would revert back. Standing on two legs just felt unnatural to her. Seeing what Akila did, Fenrir nodded his head. I will leave it to you then. Young Naruto can grow up along the other pups his age. Akila rolled her eyes as she heard that, before she looked down to the sleeping Naruto. Carefully scooping him up, making sure not to cut him with her claws, Akila looked at the boy curiously. She would be interested to see what human boy raised by wolves would be like.
4 years later, it had been just over 4 years since that day, and Naruto, as all babies do, had grown up. His time in the Black Forest had been for the most part normal, or as normal as it can be for a child being raised by direwolves. The wolf summons had done what they could to raise Naruto as one of their own, a member of their pack, trying to honor the dying wish of their previous summoner, Kushina Uzumaki. But the fact of the matter was that Naruto was different. He was a human and the rest of them were wolves. No matter how hard Akila, the leader of the pack and the sage of the Black Forest, tried, Naruto was a human and not a wolf, and so was often treated differently. It was because of this, despite having been fully accepted and welcomed into the pack, that he still thought and sometimes acted a bit like a lone wolf. Even at the age of 4 this trait was becoming noticeable as he broke away from those his own age and instead spent his time exploring the forest or picking fights with those bigger than him, be they fellow wolves or the other animals that call the Black Forest home. This wasn't really surprising considering the fact that wolves grow and mature faster than humans. This included wolf summons despite them having a greater lifespan than normal humans. This is why even the summons his own age were now much bigger than him, often making him feel weak and prompting him to get into fights to prove he was just as strong as the others. It was not helped by the fact that those few wolves who were around the same age as Naruto were now much more mature in body, if not in mind. This disparity in size often led to the others around his own age mocking Naruto, to which he would respond by throwing himself at them and getting into a fight, ignoring the differences in size and strength. More often than not he lost, but it did succeed in stopping the others from mocking him, and the very young boy had begun to earn himself some respect, for his guts if for nothing else.
This was all well and good for now, as young wolves often fought, either for dominance or for respect, or just because it was fun and was in their nature. But now the other pups of Naruto's age group were much bigger and stronger than him, which meant the chances of someone getting seriously hurt in these fights was growing. It was for this reason why Akila had told Naruto to meet her here, on the large rock outcropping in the center of the Black Forest. The clearing the outcropping sat in was large, a couple of miles away from the area the wolves slept in. This clearing was unique in that it was not only the very center of the direwolves' summoning realm, but it was their most sacred area, and dotted around the clearing were close to a dozen lupine statues. Effigies of wolves who had attempted to harness the might power that was Senjutsu, but who had failed. These effigies were left here as a warning to those who decided to walk the path of a sage. Letting out a soft sigh as she surveyed the area, Akila knew it was time, in her mind at least, that Naruto learned to be a summoner of the direwolves like his mother was before him. Just as it was time that Naruto embrace both his origins and his upbringing so he could learn how to fight, hunt and kill like both a direwolf and a shinobi.
Naruto. Akila called, turning her head to the side, her amber lupine eyes locking on the mop of spiky blonde hair that was Naruto. The boy having been attempting to sneak up on her, unsuccessfully.
"Ah, how did you know I was here?" The 4-year-old replied irritably, as he came out from where he was hiding behind the trunk of one of the very large trees in the Black Forest.
A very slight smile spread across Akila's face as she saw the petulant expression on Naruto's face, very much amused that a 4-year-old pup thought that he could sneak up on the 164-year-old pack leader.
Focusing in on Naruto as he slowly approached her, dragging his feet as he did so, Akila smiled again. Naruto had grown up to be a strong, sturdy child, with deep, aquamarine blue eyes, spiky yellow hair and 3 distinct whisker-like birthmarks on each of his cheeks. Currently stood at a little less than 4 feet tall, and was wearing only a simple white t-shirt with the Uzumaki swirl on it and a pair of orange shorts. His feet were left bare.
His clothing had been scavenged from an old den that Kushina had taken to storing some of her belongings in, a couple of years ago.
These belongings consisted of anything from her shinobi equipment, to her old academy workbooks, to the trinkets she had picked up during her time as a shinobi. After all, what better place to store your excess belongings than in a summoning realm that only you have access to? Not that Akila appreciated Kushina storing her crap in their realm, but the redhead was stubborn and Akila had always had a soft spot for her.
Naruto. Akila began softly, looking down at the little boy as he approached her. The smile still gracing her features, as she saw how small the 4-year-old was, especially when compared to her colossal 30-foot form. "Do you know why I have called you here? Is it because I have been fighting again?" Naruto replied, idly kicking the ground and avoiding looking at his mother figure.
Honestly, she would not have known if he had been. It appeared that due to Naruto being both an Uzumaki and the Jinchuriki of the 9 tails, that he had developed a powerful healing factor. This meant that he rapidly healed from all but the most serious of injuries. That being said, though, considering his age and the size difference between those he was now fighting, the injuries from such fights might start getting serious, even if they were not meant to be. Partly, Akila began, gaining Naruto's full attention as she did so. His eyes now locked on her cautiously. He had come here expecting the usual reprimand about how he shouldn't fight so much with his brothers and sisters, followed by a lecture on how they were a pack and should act like it. "The reason I have called you here is because I think it is time you learn how to truly fight, and become the new summoner of the direwolves and harness everything that comes with that." Akila continued calmly, seeing a lot of young Kushina in Naruto as she saw the excited grin pass across his face. Kushina had already been a full-grown woman and a full-time shinobi when she had first summoned Akila and later became the direwolves summoner. She had become pregnant with Naruto only a year later. As such, although she had been able to summon wolves and reverse summon herself to the Black Forest, she never had the chance to learn all of their secrets. She had never learnt senjutsu from Akila, or any of the direwolves' techniques. There had never been the time to fully teach her. Naruto, though, was still a child. They had all the time in the world to teach him everything they knew and turn him into both a shinobi and a wolf that both they and his mother would be proud of. Akila grinned fiercely to herself at this thought. The Toad Summoning Clan, the Slug Summoning Clan and the Snake Summoning Clan, they were all so arrogant and so high and mighty about their summoners, often acting like they were the most powerful clans of summons. That arrogance pissed her off, just as it pissed off a lot of the other summoning clans. Well, she would love to see their faces when they see her Naruto in action, especially considering his colossal chakra reserves, natural talent, and born stubbornness, no doubt thanks to both his Uzumaki heritage and his being the Jinchuriki of the 9 tails. "That sounds so cool," Naruto said excitedly, a grin now prominent on his face at the thought of being taught how to not just fight and hunt, but how to summon other wolves and whatever other secret techniques Akila had up her non-existent sleeve. No more would the other pups his age call him a hairless runt. Now he would be able to stand tall, the strongest of them all. "So when do we start?" "We will start now, but first off you also need to learn utilize your chakra." "Now before you ask," Akila began cutting off the question she could feel coming from Naruto, instead fixing her amber eyes on him, giving him a look that said, "Listen, don't talk. Chakra is an energy used by both shinobi and summons to do many things, from manipulating the elements to summoning wolves. All living beings produce chakra, including you. me, your brother and sisters and countless others. Now since you contain this chakra in your body, you can only have so much of it at a time, and if you run out, you die. The first thing I'll be teaching you is how to access and control your chakra, then we will move on to how to use it. It'll be hard, but if you're not up for it I could always take you to your mother's old shinobi village, the Hidden Leaf Village. No way, I want to learn from you. I want to become as strong as you, Fenrir and the others. I want to become the strongest I can be, Naruto said fiercely, a burning desire showing in his eyes. This forest was his home, and the wolves were his family. He didn't care about this village his mother called home, he had never set foot in the place. As far as Naruto concerned, this was her true home, just like it was his. Akila grinned at that, delighted by the passionate desire to grow stronger that she could sense from Naruto. He truly was as much her son as he was Kushina's. Good, I hoped you would say that. First off we will start off with meditation, working on your senses and your chakra, and then we will put it to good use by going on a hunt. Akila said as she began to go over the basics Naruto would need if he ever wanted to become a true sage. Naruto scowled at the sound of having to meditate. He didn't like sitting still. He wanted to run free, to become one with the wilds, to hunt his prey. Still though, Akila didn't do things for no reason. If she said he needed to meditate, then he would meditate. He didn't want to get her pissed off with him. After all, if he did, she would be the one hunting him.
4 years later, I'm impressed. Getting a grasp on Sage Mode at such a young age is an incredible feat. You've become an awful lot stronger, Naruto, more than a match for your brothers and sisters.
Akila said, her teeth bared as she looked down at Naruto, the 8-year-old boy standing taller and broader than when he had first started his training. He was still much smaller than his brothers and sisters though, barely coming up to the shoulder of even the smallest adult wolf. His appearance was deceptive though, as hidden within that small body were chakra reserves that would put a full-grown Junin shinobi to shame, and a skill and ferocity that had at first even taken Akila aback. Still though, the effects of his becoming the summoner of the wolves and becoming a sage had shown. His teeth had begun to sharpen, his sharp curly white canines now stuck out under his lip, his hair had begun to darken and had become shaggier, his nails had also thickened and sharpened, becoming similar to claws. No need to sound so surprised, Naruto replied glibly from where he was lounging on the rock outcropping. Enjoying the compliments Akila was giving him. She had been a harsh and ruthless taskmaster over the years, accepting nothing but his best and often pushing him far beyond his limits. She didn't give out compliment easily.
Take it for what it is, brat, a compliment. Akila replied back in amusement, lowering herself to the ground as she did so that she could look Naruto in the eye.
You are the first human that we have ever taught this art to. Your mother Kushina was only able to learn how summon us, already you have surpassed her. That being said, you are by no means a master of senjutsu. Your fighting skills, although fast and deadly, lack the ferocity, speed and accuracy of a true wolf. You've become strong, my son, but there is still much for you to learn about being a sage.
Naruto scowled as he heard that. I thought I was already strong enough to be a sage.
Besides, I've mastered sage mode, so there's no way I can't be a sage. Naruto relied, a scowl on his face as he looked up at Akila. He always found it amusing how the definition of sage changed depending on summoning clan. For the wolves, their version of a sage revolved around not only being one with nature in general, but becoming one with their own lupine nature, and the nature of wolves was distinctly different to the nature of slugs and toads. Mastered. You have a ways to go before you've mastered Sage Mode, Naruto. What kind of enemy would let his opponent sit there and charge up energy for 10 minutes? As it is now, your Sage Mode is useless in combat. Akila replied, an amused look on her face. And if you want to become stronger, you will need to find a way around that. Well, what else can I do, huh? You said it yourself, one must be absolutely still when gathering natural energy, or risk losing control and joining these poor fools who tried and failed. Naruto said, gesturing to the surrounding stone statues of direwolves who had failed their Sage Mode training and paid the price. Not many direwolves were taught the art, and even fewer ever succeeded. Most learned the basics and left it at that. So far in the pack, only Naruto, Akila and Fenrir could use Sage Mode, and of them only Akila could be called an undisputed master. To become a sage you must become one with nature, that is why I regularly took you on hunts, so that you can become one with your surroundings and with your inner wolf. Aquila began to lecture as she looked down at Naruto. There is a way around your problem, you just have to figure out how to do it. Can't you teach me? Naruto asked with a frown. She had taught him everything else after all, how to fight in hand-to-hand, how to manipulate the elements, how to wield his chakra and merge it with natural energy. She had also sparred against him, pushing him beyond his limits as she made him think outside the box in order to defeat her. Thus far he hadn't even come close. But he had learnt to use weapons, alongside his sage mode and claws, and every day he lasted just that little bit longer. Aquila looked at him for a few seconds as she heard this, before she sighed. I can't teach you because I don't know the answer yet, even if I did though I would want you to work it out on your own. The ability to draw in natural energy whilst moving comes naturally to us wolves, and despite you being born a human you grew up a member of the pack, as such I expect you to learn how to use sage mode like a member of the pack. I started you off by having you mediate so you could feel out the natural energy, then I had you merge it with your own body. It is up to you to figure out how you can do this whilst moving. Naruto frowned as he heard that, concentrating hard as he tried to work out how he could do what Aquila wanted him to. He could see her point, and although annoying, he also knew that it would be best if he figured this out on his own. Closing his eyes, Naruto took a deep breath, as he drew on the natural energy in the area, merging it with his own chakra. Opening his eyes, Naruto's blue eyes turned amber, his hair turning completely silver, his feet and hands becoming more claw-like. In this mode not only were his senses and physical abilities massively heightened, but his skin became as hard as rock, his claws became as sharp as knives and his ability to sense chakra was on a whole other level. Flexing his arms, Naruto reveled in the strength he could now feel flowing through him. He could do it, if Aquila and Fenrir could do it, then so could he. 4 years later, so you think you are ready to leave the Black Forest and venture out on your own? Even though you're still a little runt who just recently learned to use sage mode efficiently. Fenrir said mockingly, the colossal gray wolf currently standing up on all fours, towering over the 12-year-old Naruto. A snarl on his face as his ferocious golden eyes locked on the silver-haired boy in front of him.
More than ready. Naruto replied bluntly, fearlessly meeting Fenrir's gaze as he looked up at the wolf, which stood at almost 20 feet tall, a towering mass of muscle and ferocity and one of the most powerful members of the pack. I may have just mastered sage mode, but you know that I'm better at it than you. I can't learn any more here. I want to see the world. I want to test myself against the strongest there are. To do that I need to go out on my own, go on my own hunts and form my own pack. 4 years had passed since he had first learned to absorb natural energy and enter sage mode.
In those 4 years Naruto had changed a lot, his hair was now permanently silver, and his eyes were a glowing amber color. His hands and feet had become like claws, the nails harder than steel and able to tear through solid rock. His frame had also bulked up, making him look closer to 16 than 12, his growth having been accelerated due to his use of natural energy from such a young and the constant fights he engaged in with the other wolves. Currently he stood at just under 5 foot 10 inches, with broad shoulder and heavily muscled arms and legs. The only thing he was wearing was a simple baggy, black t-shirt and a pair of shinobi pants. His feet as always remained bare, Naruto seeing no need to wear sandals as they would only get in the way. Strapped to his back was a simple sword, his mother's old blade, a nameless sword that she had salvaged from the long-since destroyed village hidden in the whirlpool, the former home of the Uzumaki clan, in her youth. The blade was a simple 4-foot-long, straight sword, with an unadorned guard and a black leather sheath and handle. The only decoration it held were the kanji that were finely etched onto the blade, having obviously been put there by the blacksmith when it was forged. Naruto had found the sword among the rest of the crap his mother stored in a small cave in the Black Forest. When he had mentioned it to Aquila, she had encouraged him to take it. Probably because she wanted him to clear out his other's clutter, but also because she knew he might find a use for it. He's right, you know, Fenrir. He's surpassed you in using the technique, he's probably surpassed me too. Despite that though, he's still too inexperienced to be a true sage, to be a true alpha. Real-world experience is the only way to fix that. Aquila spoke up softly as she walked forwards, coming to a stop next to her mate Fenrir. As she stood next to Fenrir, Naruto couldn't help but note in amusement that Aquila towered over Fenrir, standing nearly 10 feet taller than him. Fenrir grunted at that, shifting his head to look at Aquila, before turning back to Naruto. Well, I suppose as long as he summons us whenever he gets in over his head, and doesn't forget that he is a member of our family, then it is fine. An amused look passed across Aquila's face as she heard that. For all of Fenrir's apparent ferocity, he was a marshmallow at heart. He placed his concern for the pack above everything else, and since Naruto was a member of their family, well, Fenrir had an almost fatherly concern for the boy. A smirk passed across Naruto's face too, as he also understood that Fenrir was only concerned for him. Turning away from the large gray wolf, Naruto instead turned to Aquila. So you have no problem with me leaving? Follow your own path, Naruto. We will always be here if you want to come back. Aquila replied softly as she looked down at Naruto. Then that's what I will do, Naruto said with a nod of his head, knowing as he did that the road ahead would be hard. He would no doubt face multiple powerful enemies as he tried to find this way in the world of shinobi. If he was honest with himself though, he was very much looking forward to it. The Black Forest, although a place he considered home, was only so big. He was more than ready to venture out into the real world to test his mettle. With Naruto a year later, Naruto felt that for the most part he had had a pretty decent upbringing, for literally being raised by wolves, that is.
Aquila had instilled in him a moral code of sorts. This moral code for some would be seen as distinctly gray, but for him was basically gospel.
He had been taught that the strong survive and the weak die, that there is just as much thrill in the hunt as there is in the kill, and that the pack is the most important thing. Other things like the basic what is right and what is wrong was never really covered. Aquila instead left that up to him to decide, stating that most of it was common sense. The only thing she really impressed upon him was the pack always came first, and no matter what you should never kill a member of your own pack. That being said, Aquila, despite her ambiguity when it came to morals and ethic, was somewhat of a stickler when it came to the rest of Naruto's upbringing. Knowing as she did that he would one day choose to walk among the humans, she had decided to not just teach him how to fight, hunt and kill, but the other necessities he would need. She had taught him the basic things he would need to know when traveling through the human world, like numbers and language, manners and etiquette, the basic geography of the elemental nations, etc. The old Shinobi Academy textbooks Kushina left in the Black Forest alongside the rest of her crap was very useful for this. It was because of this knowledge that Naruto had been able to thrive since leaving the Black Forest and coming to the world of man. Shinobi, he had found out, did not hold the monopoly on mercenary work like one would expect. Oftentimes their services were highly expensive. The payment for a C-rank mission alone was more than most families could earn in a year, and the missions only got more expensive as the ranking increased. A single S-rank mission from one of the larger shinobi villages like the Hidden Cloud, the Hidden Rock or the Hidden Leaf could impoverish a small nation, depending on the difficulty of the mission and how many shinobi would need to be sent. There were other options though, such as going to the smaller shinobi villages, like the Hidden Rain, or the village hidden in the waterfalls. The prices these villages charged for their services were not quite as extortionate, they were still expensive though. It was because of this reason that the shinobi villages didn't have the monopoly many thought on gigs like protection, assassination, espionage and the like. No, there were cheaper alternatives for those missions. Missing nin, shinobi who abandoned their villages and were often actively hunted by said villages. They provided cheaper alternatives, as did roving mercenary bands and exiled samurai. It was in that less than esteemed company that Naruto was able to make a healthy living and somewhat of a name for himself. It had been 12 months since he had first walked into the seedy bar in Clover Town, the Lusty Leopard. It had been the first place he had visited, in the first town he had come across since he was reverse summoned to the human world. Suffice to say, his impression of it had not been great. The building was a ramshackle, two-story wooden building. When he had first entered, his heightened senses had almost been overwhelmed by the stench of sweat, stale alcohol and greasy food. Luckily though, he had been able to power through, driven on by his curiosity at meeting other humans for the first time. It had been a disappointing first meeting. A guy sitting at the bar had simply sneered at him and told him to piss off back to kiddie school. Naruto ended up smashing his face into the marked and pitted wooden surface of the bar, breaking the man's teeth and nose and causing him to let out a loud scream of shock and pain. That had gotten Naruto the attention of the entire bar. A brief brawl later and a half-dozen broken bones and lacerations made it clear to the bar's clientele that Naruto was not someone you fucked with. After making sure he made that point, he went on to ask for some food, taking the money from one of the half-dozen thugs he had beaten down to pay for his meal. As it turned out, Naruto's first impression was not that uncommon. The bar was known to draw a rougher crowd, as exiled samurai, mercenaries and missing nin often frequented the place. It was because of this, or maybe caused by this, that the bar had somewhat of a bad reputation. When he had first looked around the bar, Naruto had been surprised to see that against one of the bar's walls there was a large request board displayed. A request board that held hundreds of paper bounties and requests, posted by government officials, private parties and the like. These requests were often for protection, for hired muscle, or to advertise bounties that had been put on the heads of shinobi, missing nin and other people of interest. Upon hearing this, Naruto had decided to give one of them a go. After all, this was apparently how people like Naruto made money. People who excelled in fighting but who didn't want to or weren't allowed to join the shinobi villages. The first mission Naruto had ended up taking was a bounty request, for some failed academy student from the Hidden Cloud village. The man had apparently been causing trouble in a nearby town, using the paltry skills he learned at a shinobi academy to bully, harass and rob people traveling to and from the town. This had ended up interfering with the town's trade, often putting off some of the more squeamish merchants. The town had put in a request for the man to be dealt with. Naruto had accepted it. From there it had only taken him about an hour to reach the town and track his target down. This had been made easier by the fact that the man had more chakra than the average person thanks to his shinobi training. Which for Naruto, who was nowadays constantly in sage mode and very much able to sense chakra, made it almost painful easy for him to track down the man. What followed was the man attempting to intimidate Naruto with a sword when he was confronted, and Naruto ripping the man's throat out with his clawed hand. It had taken Naruto about an hour from accepting the job to bringing his body to a nearby bounty hunting station that was based in the same town as the Lusty Leopard. A 2-hour job all round that had ended up earning him 10,000 ryo. Naruto had to say that he liked it, though the prey could have been better. That had been 12 months, and over 200 confirmed bounties ago. Walking forward confidently, a slight smile on his face, Naruto's amber eyes almost glowed as he entered the dimly lit main room of the Lusty Leopard. His entrance did not go unnoticed as a few of the regulars called out greetings to him as he passed. Seeing this, Naruto gave them a brief nod in return, despite him not having bothered to remember their names. Naruto had grown a lot in the last year. He now stood at close to 6 foot with broader shoulders and more muscled arms. His hair was still shaggy, a grayish-silver color. His eyes had also retained their glowing amber color, whilst the whisker-like birthmarks had become even darker and more pronounced. For the last year he hadn't stopped using Sage Mode once, having become accustomed to constantly absorbing natural energy, even when he was asleep. Over the last year he had also managed to buy and scavenge a new outfit. Consisting of finely made black shinobi pants, a gray t-shirt and a black knee-length coat. His sword was now strapped to his back, the hilt of the blade just poking up over his right shoulder. And as always he continued to refuse to wear shoes, instead walking on his clawed feet, trusting in his all but impenetrable skin to protect him more than a simple leather sandal ever could. Continuing on, Naruto nodded to the barman, Sokka. He was a large thick-set man, with no hair on his head and a large black beard, who upon seeing Naruto grunted a bit before sending him a brief nod back. It had been over a month since he had been back at this inn, as he often liked to travel from town to town. He had to admit though he was happy that he was back. Many towns in the different country had a place like the Lusty Leopard in it, or a bounty station, or at least somewhere Naruto could find work. The Lusty Leopard though, as the first place he had visited since leaving the Black Forest, always held a special place in Naruto's heart. This was the reason why he came back every now and then. Plus they had a very good request board. The barman and owner of the bar, Sokka, having been a rock shinobi once, still had a number of friends and contacts that allowed him to stock up on requests and missions, which Sokka would go on to post on his request board, often drawing in people like Naruto who would spend their coin here as a thanks. Ignoring him for now, Naruto instead approached the request board, looking for an interesting job he could take. Immediately he ignored jobs like hired muscle or protection rackets. Those kind of jobs didn't interest him, they were too easy and the pay was shit. Bounties though, bounty mission they did interest him. A number of the requests posted on the board were pages that had been ripped out of the different shinobi villages' bingo books, little booklets that displayed shinobi of interest, all of whom had a price on their head. Each village had a slightly different book, which contained brief descriptions of missing nin from both their own village and the other ones, an enemy shinobi of interest from one of the other shinobi villages. These for Naruto were the most interesting bounties. Hunting down and killing shinobi was far more exciting than killing thugs, businessmen and the like. Shinobi could at least fight back, or could at least attempt to, and that actually make the hunt fun. So far he had taken close to 150 of these requests, most of them low-level bounties for D-ranked, C-ranked and B-ranked shinobi. And so far he had not failed a single one. His heightened senses and his ability to sense chakra allowed him to easily track down the shinobi, and his use of sage mode made killing them even easier. That being said, he did like to play around with them before he ended them, often testing his swordsmanship and taijutsu against the trained shinobi. So far though not a single shinobi B rank or below had managed to put even a scratch on him. It was disappointing, but at the same time it was interesting to see how diverse shinobi skills were, and even more fun to prove the power of the wolf sage was many times superior. Scanning the board of requests, Naruto paused slightly as he saw the bingo book entry for the S-ranked missing nin Itachi Uchiha. Reaching out a clawed hand for the yellowed and crinkled page, Naruto agonized about whether or not to take it. Before, with a shake of his head, he let go of the page relating to Itachi Uchiha, one of the 20 S-ranked shinobi who had been put in bingo books, and whose pages had been torn out and pinned to this board. For the last few months Naruto had been pondering over whether or not to take one of these bounties. The idea of hunting down an S-ranked shinobi, the best of the best, had given Naruto somewhat of a thrill. But reason had always taken hold first. Naruto may be very confident in his abilities, but he was not some maniac. He knew he couldn't just go running off fighting a shinobi of that caliber, at least not yet. Especially a shinobi like Itachi Uchiha, the man was one of the best. Up there with the likes of Sasori of the Red Sand, Orochimaru of the Sannin, Jiraiya the Toad Sage, Killer Bee and many other S-rank shinobi. These were shinobi that Naruto would one day hunt, but for now he needed to work his way up, and hone his abilities before he could go about hunt them down. Testing his strength and the strength of the direwolves against the best of the best. So far Naruto reckoned he was at the least at the level of a high A-rank shinobi to a low S-rank shinobi. His mastery of sage mode and his taijutsu and kenjutsu skills were proof enough of that, and that was not taking into account the few sage-based ninjutsu he had picked up during his time in the Black Forest. Unfortunately though, he did have a few weaknesses, namely genjutsu. Naruto's chakra was so colossal that it made it all but impossible for him to use genjutsu. Even with his finely tuned chakra control he couldn't manage even a simple genjutsu, or at least not one that wouldn't be patently obvious to even a genin. This Naruto deemed was a weakness. He may be able to release himself from a basic genjutsu if he was caught up in one, but so far he was unable to cast them. This especially bothered him considering that the best shinobi like Orochimaru, Itachi and Jiraiya had been able to master all of the shinobi arts. Pushing those thoughts away for now, Naruto ignored the S-rank bounties and instead snagged him a nice simple B-rank one instead.
This one looked particularly interesting. Apparently there has been a band of shinobi raiding villages and settlements in Rice Country. According to the description, the daimyo of Rice Country had issued a bounty for the group to be hunted down and killed. The group was apparently running amok, kidnapping people at random, burning anything that got in their way and then fleeing. Suffice to say it had Naruto's interest. "I'm taking this one," Naruto said bluntly as he ripped the request off the board and shoved it in his coat pocket. Getting a grunt of affirmation from Sokka as he strode past the bar and out of the inn. The two of them had a special connection. Over the 12 months they had known each other, Naruto hadn't heard the man speak once for Naruto. Sokka was one of the most likable humans he had come across. A few days later in Rice Country, rushing through the trees, Naruto's eyes narrowed as he saw the retreating backs of his quarry.
It had been a couple of days since he had taken the job and his targets had been busy. In that time they had managed to hit a further 2 villages, bringing the total count up to 9 that were known. Naruto had arrived too late to stop the attack on the first settlement. By the time he had arrived a number of buildings had already burnt down, 27 people were dead and a further 6 had been taken captive. The attack had ended 2 hours before Naruto had arrived, much to his irritation. Luckily though, he had managed to pick up their trail. A trail he had followed to yet another burning settlement, little more than a hunting lodge really. Which, just like their other targets, was small, secluded and sparsely populated. It probably boasted a population of barely 20.
Naruto had arrived just as his targets were fleeing. The ground around the settlement were littered with corpses, and from what he could sense there was not a single person left alive in the settlement. It had been a complete massacre.
Upon noting that Naruto had begun his pursuit, easily tearing through the dense woodland, his senses flaring as he tracked down the 9 shinobi he was hunting, or at last he assumed it was 9 judging by their chakra levels, as well as the 8 civilian captives they had seemed to have taken. Naruto was silent as he stalked his prey, not making a sound as he ran through the trees, doggedly following the enemy shinobi. As he pursued them, he made sure to keep his distance, not wanting to alert them to his presence in case they had a sensory shinobi among them who might be able to forewarn them that he was on their tail. He also wanted to track them back to their base of their hideout. After all, the bounty had not specified how many there were. It had only said 5,000 ryo ahead, and Naruto was feeling hungry. An hour or so later, night had drawn in as Naruto moved swiftly and silently through the trees, beginning to quicken his pace now that his targets had stopped moving. Already he could hear voices coming from just in front of him and could see the flickering light of a fire, the golden light being just visible through the dense forest. It seemed these rogue shinobi were very confident, either in their abilities or in the fact that they were not being pursued. After all, why else would they have an open fire like this, or talk as loudly as they were doing? Coming to a stop just before his target's encampment, Naruto paused, spreading out his senses as he did so. So far he could sense 13 people in the camp ahead who had more chakra than an average civilian, making them the shinobi he was after. None of them were that impressive really, ranging from around high genin levels to high chunin levels, or at least that is what Naruto estimated from his experience. But what they lacked in raw power they made up for in numbers. On top of the shinobi he had identified, he could also sense 23 civilians also in the encampment, easily identified by how little chakra they had. Now these could be common bandits, but somehow Naruto doubted that. Shinobi often thought themselves above common thugs and cutthroats, so it was unlikely they would work with them. Plus the request had stated that they were kidnapping civilians, and Naruto had seen evidence himself of this. No, in Naruto's mind it was more likely that they were captives, taken from the raided villages.
With that assessment made, Naruto began to prowl forwards again, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the darkness as he saw the silhouette of a figure at the edge of the camp. It seems they were not arrogant enough not to set a watch. Not that that would do them any good. Naruto didn't pause for a second as he leapt forward, his clawed hand outstretched. The watchman didn't even have a chance to scream as Naruto ripped his throat out and then dragged him into the dark woodland, not making a sound as he ghosted his first victim.
Naruto paused as he dropped the dead man onto the ground, hiding him behind a bush for now as he instead focused on the camp. Making sure his actions had gone unnoticed, which, judging by how the loud conversation went on undisturbed, seemed to be the case.
Shifting forwards once more, Naruto grinned as he closed in on his prey.
As he drew closer to the camp, he soon began to make it out. The camp was made up of 3 mottled green-colored tents, a large campfire which had a number of pots bubbling away just above it, and finally a large prison wagon just to the side.
The wagon was a large wooden frame with 4 iron-studded wheels. Attached to the top of the wagon there was an iron cage, within which Naruto could make out a number of huddled shapes. Just to the side of the wagon Naruto could also see 2 horses tied to a nearby tree, both of them grazing at the edge of the campsite.
Turning away from the prison wagon for now, Naruto instead focused on the center of the camp. Around the fire Naruto could make out the shapes of 10 people sitting around, all of them shinobi. Shifting his gaze back to the edge of the campsite, Naruto was soon able to find another shinobi who was standing guard at the back of the prison wagon. The final one though, Naruto frowned as he spread his senses out. The final one seemed to be in the prison wagon itself. Naruto frowned as he sensed this, trying to work out why someone trained to use chakra would be kept in the cage along with the others. The first thing that came to mind was a trap, someone placed there to kill anyone who attempted to free the prisoners. He soon dismissed that theory though, A plan like that would require intelligence and caution, which was something this group of rogue shinobi seemed to lack. Ignoring that problem for now, Naruto instead looked back to the main group, slowly moving around the edge of the camp as he listened in on the conversation they seemed to be having.
In the camp, I'm telling you right now, no one is allowed to touch the prisoners.
The master will use you in one of his experiments if he finds you have interfered with one of his test subjects. One of the men said loudly, his tone laced with irritation. The man who spoke was tall and skinny, with short black hair and a gaunt pale face. His clothing, like his fellow shinobi, seemed to be a mottled grayish-black color, and like them he seemed to be armed with standard shinobi equipment, including a sword, kunai and shuriken. Oh come on, how will he notice? Another one of the men answered. This one was shorter than the first, with a squat, stocky body, tanned skin and a scrubby black beard. I mean, we got some real pretty ones this time. I am sure the master won't begrudge us a bit of fun. Trust me if when I say this, he will know and he will make you suffer. I am saying this for your own good, don't interfere with the master's test subjects. The first man replied, a note of fear entering in his voice as he spoke about this master of his.
This bullshit. The second man snarled. You wouldn't allow us to stick around and have a bit of fun in any of those villages we attacked, and now you're not even letting us enjoy the spoils of war. The master told us not to stick around. We were to go in and get him the best candidates for his experiments we could find, and then we were to get out. The first man said, his voice hard and uncompromising.
You're worse than that fucking Kabuto shit. Tell me, how many ties has your master blasted you in the ass? Exclamation mark quote. The second man sneered, those around him jeering in agreement as they watched the ongoing argument in amusement. This seemed to encourage the squat, bearded man, as he sent the taller man a nasty look. So what I say is, you fuck off and get out of our way. Do that and I might let you have a go on that fine piece of ass we picked up in the loggers' camp, after I've had my go, of course. The others seemed to jeer and cheer louder as they heard this, several of them rising to their feet. The first man glared darkly at that before he stood up. With a rasp of steel he then drew his sword, a simple katana, which he held confidently in front of him. His gaze not faltering as he glared back at the squat, bearded man. We were given orders, and if I have to kill you to make sure those orders are obeyed, I will. You're feeling confident, are you? The shorter man looked taken aback at that, for a moment. Before, with a nasty smirk, he grabbed a hold of a nearby woodcutting axe he had stolen from the loggers' camp, easily hefting it in his hands as he turned to face the taller man. The rest of the shinobi also beginning to rise to their feet. You really think you can take me, Kaiza? The now named Kaiza didn't answer as he simply gripped his sword tighter, the long blade held at the ready. Nor would he ever get a chance to, as at that moment the watching Naruto decided to take advantage of the distraction their argument caused and attack. With Naruto didn't give any warning as he leapt exploded from the tree line, rapidly closing in on the group of rogue shinobi. His body was little more than a blur as his Sage Mode enhanced muscles propelled him across the leafy ground faster than a high-level Junin. Before any of the raiders knew what was happening, Naruto was among them, his clawed hand tearing through the torso of Kaiza, ripping a large chunk out of his chest and killing him in an instant. The others barely had a chance to voice their surprise at their leader's death before Naruto was among them, his right hand lashing out and tearing the short, squat man's throat out, causing him to collapse backwards, his hands futilely scrabbling at the gaping, bloody wound in his throat. A meaningless act as the wound was too deep and grievous, his life blood spraying out of it and soaking into the ground. Lashing out with his other hand, Naruto sheared through another man, disemboweling him with his claws, before he lashed out with his other hand, ripping yet another man's throat out. Twisting around, Naruto delivered a kick to a fifth man's chest. The strength behind the kick sent the man hurtling back several meters, his chest a shattered ruin and his organs completely pulverized. What the fuck? One of the other men shouted as he drew his sword and lashed out at Naruto, his strike desperate and uncoordinated. The man's eyes wide with fear and terror, as he blindly attacked the silver-haired man who had just slaughtered 5 of his fellows in barely 30 seconds, not even aiming, as felt a primal terror rising up in him. Naruto saw the sword blade descending towards him, easily slapping the blade away before spearing his hand forward, his hand as deadly as any sword. With barely any resistance, his clawed hand tore through his opponent's chest before closing around his heart. Then in a grabbing motion Naruto yanked the still beating heart out of the man's chest. Twisting, Naruto grabbed the sword from the now dead man's hand, time seeming to slow as he turned to face the prison wagon, his amber eyes fixed on the guard who looked to be caught between fleeing and attacking. Naruto didn't giving him a chance as he hurled the sword at the man. The sheer force behind the throw caught the indecisive shinobi off guard, as the blade pierced straight through his torso and pinned him to a nearby tree, the blade sinking down to the hilt. Naruto ignored that though, already aware the man was dead as he turned and threw the chunk of meat that had once been another human's heart at one of the other shinobi. An act that made the shinobi flinch backwards, and which allowed Naruto to close in on him, his claws already extended as they ripped through the shinobi's skin, muscle and bones. Seeing the latest of their fellows die, the three remaining shinobi decided unanimously to retreat. Turning tail, the three shinobi fled the encampment, channeling chakra to their muscles as they attempted to get as far away from the rampaging silver-haired monster as they could. One of the braver ones attempted to stall Naruto, as he turned on the spot and released a fireball at the sage, rapidly going through a set of hand signs before blowing a medium-sized fireball out of his cupped hands. With Naruto grinned as he saw three of his prey attempting to flee. Crouching low, Naruto sprang forward. Crossing the encampment in seconds, Naruto didn't pause as he saw one of the shinobi turn and launch a fireball at him. With a savage grin, Naruto ran through the fire, not even feeling a flicker of pain or heat as the fire licked futilely at his sage-enhanced skin. Exploding out of the other side of the fireball, Naruto only grinned wider as he saw the look of horror on his attacker's face. It was a look that would be forever frozen on his face as Naruto lashed out with his hand a moment later and ripped his head off. Landing easily on the ground, Naruto then sprinted after the other two, catching up with the first one 10 meters out from the camp. The man didn't stand a chance as Naruto's clawed hand tore through his back muscles, gripping onto his spine, before with a slight grunt he ripped apart his spinal cord out of the man's back, in a shower of blood. The man let loose a single scream of agony, before he collapsed bonelessly to the floor. Seeing this, the final shinobi stumbled, falling to the ground as he futilely tried to back away from the advancing Naruto. His eyes fixed on Naruto's blood-stained hands, small crimson droplets spattering onto the floor as he prowled forwards. Please, don't," the man begged, his eyes wide with terror as he backed away from his unstoppable attacker. Naruto didn't give him the chance to finish his pleading, as he reached up and gripped the hilt of his sword, before with a single swing he unsheathed it and beheaded the rogue shinobi. The shinobi's head falling to the forest floor behind him with a dull thud. A frown appeared on Naruto's face as he looked down at the twitching body of the now headless man. When the men had fled, he had been expecting more of a hunt. His blood had already begun pumping faster. Unfortunately though, it seemed these men's escaping skills were almost as poor as their fighting skills. It was disappointing to say the least. Naruto had at least been hoping that their numbers would make this more of a challenge.
It seemed he had gotten his hopes up for nothing. With that thought in mind, Naruto sheathed his sword and then shoved a hand into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a tightly furled scroll. Opening it, Naruto then proceeded to seal away the remains of the two shinobi who had attempted to flee. He then turned and headed back to the camp, ignoring the scared captives in the prison wagon for now, as he instead walked around the camp sealing up the remains of the shinobi he had killed. He would need proof after all if he wanted to collect his reward from the daimyo. Eventually Naruto went to collect the last body. It was the shinobi who he had pinned to the tree with the sword.
Looking at his glazed eyes and ignoring the whimpering he could hear coming from the prison wagon, instead looking down at the sword. It was buried to the hilt in the man's stomach and had in fact penetrated through the tree, the tip of the blade stick out of the other side. With a discompassionate gaze, Naruto snapped the hilt of the sword off, allowing the dead man to slump forwards and collapse on the floor. A few minutes later, with the bloody remains of the 12 shinobi he had killed all sealed up in the once again rolled up scroll, Naruto then shoved it in his pocket. Making plans to go to a bounty station first, just to see if any of these men had a decent bounty on their heads, or at least better than the 5,000 ryo a head the daimyo of Rice Country was offering. Nodding his head, Naruto turned to look at the prison wagon, ignoring the whinnying of the nearby horses as they smelt the fresh blood in the air, and the whimpers of the prisoners as they saw Naruto's amber gaze fix on them. He might as well let them out. Naruto grunted in irritation at this before he walked over to the prison wagon, gripping both sides of the cage door, his claws digging into the melt like a hot knife through butter. Before with a single heave Naruto tore the front of the cage off its hinges, before he turned and hurtled it away into the surrounding forest. Right then, you're all free to go, Naruto said abruptly as he turned and walked away, not even turning to look to see whether the prisoners had taken the opportunity to get off the wagon. No, instead he focused on the one, strong remaining chakra signature. The one within the wagon, waiting to see if they would do anything. When nothing happened, Naruto turned back around only to see none of the captives had left the safety of the cage, as they instead all looked on at him with fear. Irritation rose up in Naruto at this, but with a bit of effort he pushed it down. The nearest settlement is 12 miles in that direction. I would suggest you calm down the horses, attach them to this wagon and start heading there. I would also suggest you scavenge the area and take any of the weapons that are left behind, Naruto said, pointing in the direction of the last village the shinobi had attacked, the one which had survivors. Naruto could now see the confusion of the faces in the cage as they heard what he said. The sooner you leave, the sooner you can start returning to your homes. All of them are still there, if a little burnt, and there are still survivors there who will no doubt help you get back to your homes. Well, except for that logger's camp, that one's is burned to the ground with no survivors. As he said this, he got a more noticeable reaction as 1 or 2 of the 20 or so prisoners gained looks of shock and surprise. He also noticed how one of the prisoners, a pretty girl with long black hair who looked to be around Naruto's own age, flinched as she heard what he said about the logger's camp. This girl also happened to be the one who he could sense had strong chakra. Curious. Well, go on then, Naruto said brusquely as he turned and walked away, heading for the campfire set up in the center of the camp. Idly dragging one of the logs the shinobi had been using as a seat over, as he sat down and took the lid off one of the cooking pots and sniffed the stew inside suspiciously. As Naruto was doing this, the captives began to slowly get out of the prison wagon, cautiously going about the tasks Naruto had suggested, keeping a wary eye on the silver-haired sage as they did so. Their desire for freedom and home warring against the innate fear Naruto had inspired in them with his savage butchery of the 12 rogue shinobi. Naruto for the most part ignored them, the mindless sheep that they were. Instead he focused on the stew as he checked it for poison, before upon finding it clean of any contamination he began scouting around for a bowl. Despite his apparent nonchalance, however, he was very much aware of what was going on, his senses still on overdrive and his body prepared to leap into action at any moment. After all, after close to a year of dealing with shinobi, Naruto knew well enough how tricky they could be. The girl in the cage might have seemed like some innocent captive, but he would still not let his guard down. 10 minutes later, as Naruto was finishing off his second bowl of the surprising delicious beef stew. As he did so, he tensed slightly as the former prisoners began to leave the campsite, using the wagon as Naruto had suggested. That, however, was not the reason for his tensing. The reason was that one of the captives had stayed behind, the one who felt like she had had shinobi training. Naruto remained tense as he felt the girl approaching him. He had no doubt whatsoever that if needed he could rip this girl's head off with ease, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop him. The thing was, though, the girl should know that too. She had after all just seen him decimate 12 other shinobi. Despite this, though, as the rest of the former captives left, this girl stayed behind. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he heard the sound of the girl approaching him. She wasn't trying to hide her presence. Instead, she just walked up to him. He could also feel no change in her chakra, telling him she wasn't molding it or preparing a shinobi technique, not that he could tell at least. His curiosity intensified. Is there something you want? Naruto asked abruptly, not turning around as he felt the girl freezing up. He heard a slight exhalation of breath before the girl spoke, her voice soft and gentle yet holding a surprising amount of strength in it. I have nowhere to go. I told you where the nearest settlements were. You should have gone with the others and they could have helped you get home. Naruto replied bluntly, still not turning around. There would be no point. The girl replied, her voice breaking slightly as she said that. You said it yourself, my home was burned to the ground and there were no survivors. The loggers' camp? Naruto guessed, shifting as he turned to look at the girl out of the corner of his eye. It was like Naruto first thought. The girl looked to be around 13, with a pretty face, waist-length black hair, a still partially immature body and pale skin. Her clothing was the simple garb one would expect from a rural-dwelling civilian, currently looking a bit grimy and damaged, no doubt from the attack on her home and her subsequent capture.
I have nowhere to go. The girl repeated, her gaze hollow, and her tone no longer as strong as before. How's that my problem? Naruto asked abruptly, cocking an eyebrow as he waited for a response.
The girl didn't answer for a few seconds after that, her gaze instead running over Naruto's muscled frame and his blood-stained hands. You killed them, the men who murdered my family and burnt down my home. I did, yes, Naruto responded, curiosity beginning to rise up inside him as he looked at the girl, wondering where she was going with this. Can you teach me how to fight, how to kill? The girl asked, her eyes locking fearlessly with Naruto's faintly glowing amber eyes. Why on earth would I do that? Naruto asked, his tone not cruel or condescending, just curious. Especially since you already seem to have had some training. I can sense your chakra, it is stronger and more controlled than a civilian's. The girl didn't bat an eyelash as she heard that, instead she just replied softly. My father taught me, he wanted me to be able to defend myself. He was a former missing nin, he taught me chakra control, and genjutsu's his specialty. Naruto cocked an eyebrow as he heard this. Sound like you already know how to fight, join a shinobi village or something, I am sure they'll happily take you. When our home was attacked, my father and we attempted to fight back. We were overwhelmed though, my father was killed, as was my mother and all of our family friends. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't come and killed those men. The girl replied, ignoring Naruto's previous suggestion. Her tone hitching for a second as she spoke and her grief slipping in for just a moment, before it strengthened as she continued to gaze resolutely into Naruto's eyes, not backing down. I want to come with you. I want to learn how to fight like you do, how to kill bastards like those men, like you did. Naruto gazed at her curiously as he heard this, once again relying on his heightened senses as he looked carefully at the girl. She wasn't lying to him, he could tell that much. She was scared, she was grieving, she was nervous, but she wasn't lying. More than that, she was alone in this world, like Naruto had been before Aquila and Fenrir had taken him in. Letting out a sigh, Naruto turned away from the girl. She didn't move, he could tell that much, but he could hear her heart begin to beat faster, as fear and panic rose up within her. Sit down, Naruto said bluntly, idly grabbing up another bowl from the ground as he did so. The girl's heart stopped beating, for just a second it missed a beat. Then it started hammering again, in shock and surprise. There is some more stew left, you are going to need your energy. We leave in an hour. The girl stumbled forward as she heard that, taking a seat just to the side and away from Naruto, her eyes locked on him, an unreadable expression on her face as she watched him fill the bowl with stew before he shoved it over to her. Do you have a name? Naruto asked, cocking an eyebrow in curiosity as he saw the girl grab the bowl from his hand and begin eating. Not even bothering to put on airs and graces as she brought the bowl up to her mouth. The girl paused as she heard this, lowering the bowl enough so she was once again looking at Naruto. Yeah, the name's Kin. The girl replied, her voice once again soft, yet her gaze showing her inner strength. Kin Tsuchi. With Naruto. Naruto's breaths came out low and slow as he loped through the surrounding woodlands. His feet not making a sound as he deftly ran through the trees, his amber eyes fixed on the large mountainous area ahead. Not pausing for a second as he closed in on his prey. His pace was relentless as he tore through the forest, not pausing as he leapt over rocks, weaved through the surrounding trees. His movements agile despite his pace, his movements silent as he breezed through the forest, his senses flaring, his guard up and ready for anything. A few seconds later Naruto came to a stop, his feet barely making a sound as he did so. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto shifted slightly on the spot, his head raised as he sniffed the air, his other senses extended as he lazily surveyed the area. His prey was near, he could sense them. He may be actively stopping himself from sensing their chakra, but he could still smell them and hear the beating of their heart. To a normal shinobi this might have passed unnoticed, but to Naruto it made finding his prey easy. You're still not quiet enough, Kin. Naruto said softly, his amber eyes flickering up to look at the black-haired girl in the trees above him. The slightest of grins passing across his face as he saw the put-out look on her face, as she glanced down at him. Her hands held up ready to make a hand seal. Letting out an irritated sigh, Kin dropped down from the tree branch she had previously been crouched on. Her feet not making a sound as she landed in a crouch just before Naruto. Standing up, Kin had to look up as she met Naruto's amused gaze, issuing another sigh of frustration as she did so. It's not exactly easy, you know, hiding from someone with ridiculously enhanced senses and the ability to sense chakra, Kin complained, her left hand resting on her hip as she looked up at Naruto with a scowl. But I didn't find you by sensing your chakra. I found you by hearing the beat of your heart and smelling your scent. Naruto replied in amusement, as he patted Kin on the shoulder. Kin flushed red as she heard that, deliberately looking away from him. Well, I tried to hide my scent with mud. But what can I do about my heart? You need to calm yourself. You must always be in control, even during a hunt. A single mistake and your prey could slip through your claws. Naruto replied as he looked down on her, thinking as he did about how hard this was for him when he had been training with his brothers and sisters. Back then he had always gotten too excited, and this had given himself away. It was a difficult lesson to learn and even harder to put in practice. When you are hunting your prey, you must be calm, cold and silent. You must be in absolute control of your mind and body. Otherwise you were likely to get caught up in the thrill and alert your prey before you were ready. Once you had caught up to your prey, well, you could give in to the thrill and the exultation, but whilst you are stalking them, you shouldn't alert them to your presence. I know, Kin grumbled, kicking at the earth at her feet as she did so. Naruto merely chuckled in amusement. It had been about 6 months since he had allowed Kin to join him, and since then he had become somewhat fond of her. A wolf was a pack animal by nature, and Naruto was no different. As although he enjoyed being a bit of a lone wolf sometimes, he infinitely preferred it when he had a bit of company. Or a pack as he liked to call it, much to Kin's embarrassment.
Looking down at Kin, a slight smile spread across Naruto's face. She had changed a lot in the 6 months he had known her, physically, mentally and emotionally.
She was still a beauty, her long silky black hair now tied in a ponytail which reached to just below her waist. Her body was stronger than before, more flexible and lithe too. She stood taller than when Naruto had first met her, and her stance was more confident. Her paled skin had also gained a bit of a tan, as nowadays she spent the vast majority of her time in the great outdoors more often than not accompanying Naruto on his missions.
Her outfit had changed. Gone were the old civilian clothes she wore.
Nowadays she dressed more like a shinobi. She wore a pair of black shinobi pants, a gray scarf wrapped around her throat, a mesh undershirt and a gray tunic over the top. She had a leather belt around her waist, attached to which were 2 pouches at the small of her back, both of which filled with an assortment of kunai, shuriken and senbon. Also attached to her belt, on her right hip there was a foot-long tanto, a small very sharp knife that she had insisted on buying when they had traveled through a small town in the land of forests. Just as she had insisted on Naruto teaching her how to use it. The biggest change she had gone through, however, were her eyes. Her dark eyes now gleamed with strength and confidence, something that had been absent in them the first few weeks she had traveled with him, still haunted as she was by the loss of her family. Now though that grief had turned into a steely resolve, a resolve to get stronger, a resolve to hunt down and kill the master of those men who had murdered her family. A resolve to be the best that she can be so that never again would she be a victim. It was a strength of will Naruto had come to admire about her. Many would have folded and become a hollow shell of a person after the tragedy Kin had been through. But she had come through it stronger. She had harnessed her resolve to become stronger when it had come to her training. When Naruto had first begun to teach her he had held back a lot, knowing as he did that he could very easily kill her if he went all out. His claws could rip her to pieces, his punches could shatter her bones and liquidate her organs. Such was the power of Sage Mode. But when Kin had found this out she had rebuked him. Much to his amusement she had shouted at him and demanded that he not hold back. Her passion and ferocity had surprised Naruto, and so although even now he didn't go all out, he was a lot less forgiving than before. In the beginning their taijutsu spars ended with Kin unconscious and Naruto having to carry her back to their room. Despite that though she had still insisted on him not holding back, as she continued to test herself against him. Adapting her style of fighting to accommodate for Naruto's far greater strength, speed and agility, as well as his near infinite stamina and his inhuman durability. Upon realizing she would never overpower Naruto, she had instead begun to try and outthink him. Using a mixture of genjutsu, poisons, traps and her natural flexibility and agility to fight him. She had still never come close to beating him, but she seemed to improve with every spar. Her style becoming sharper, her strikes more accurate, her tactics trickier. This had led to not just Kin becoming stronger and smarter but Naruto also, as it had encouraged him to adapt to whatever tricks Kin pulled off, either with her genjutsus or with her traps and poisons.
Due to this, the two of them had got into somewhat of a routine. Every day at daybreak they would start the day off with a 2-hour training session together,
which usually consisted of a brief warm-up followed by a taijutsu spar, in which Naruto would start off on defensive, before going on the offensive, only holding back enough not to kill her. This would invariably end up with Kin receiving dozens of bruises and multiple broken knuckles or fingers, mostly caused by her punching Naruto's rock-hard skin.
After this, Kin would heal her hands, using her limited but well-practiced medical ninjutsu skills she had learned from her father. Naruto would then train on his own for another 2 hours, pushing himself to the limits as he sought to master his taijutsu, kenjutsu and ninjutsu skills.
Kin meanwhile would use this time to practice her genjutsu, often trying to put Naruto under a genjutsu during his training. More often than not though he would break the genjutsu in moments, which forced Kin to adapt as she continually tried to get the better of the sage. She would also spend some time practicing with her Tonto and plotting how she would try and beat Naruto next time they fought. It was a routine that the both of them enjoyed, not only because it allowed them to progress their individual skills. With Kin getting stronger every day, her genjutsu becoming more insidious and adaptable as she constantly tried to use them to beat Naruto. Naruto, however, was not only fine-tuning his skills, but was also getting better and better at sensing and breaking genjutsu. He still had trouble casting them though. But also because the two of them just enjoyed spending time together.
Of course, it wasn't all fun and games. Kin's presence meant that Naruto now had another mouth to feed,
which meant the two of them had to take more missions. To begin with, Naruto had stuck with simple C rank and B rank missions, just whilst they had Kin tagging along. But as she became stronger, Naruto began to start taking A rank missions, hunting down stronger, more powerful shinobi. For this, Kin had pulled her own weight, often using her genjutsu skills to support Naruto's heavily combat-based abilities.
All in all, the two of them were becoming a very deadly combination.
Right then, we are here. Keep low and be ready for anything, Naruto muttered as he patted the Kin's shoulder, not missing how her lips twitched upwards as he did so. This guy isn't an A-rank missing nin for no reason.
With that, Naruto began to move forwards, his senses flared as they approached the site of their next bounty.
Hearing what Naruto said, Kin rolled her eyes. She had spent enough time with him to know he could crush most shinobi, no matter their supposed rank. Despite that though, he remained cautious, slowly working his way up instead of taking S-rank bounty requests like she knew he wanted to. When she had asked him why, he had only told her that patience was a virtue, and the suspense would only make it that much sweeter when he finally did hunt down and kill one of the bigger names. That had only made Kin even more confused. She didn't question it though, knowing as she did that Naruto did things in his own time and in his own way. She would probably have more luck defeat Orochimaru of the Sannin than she would in changing Naruto's mind once it was made up. Letting out another sigh, Kin turned and followed Naruto as he walked to the edge of the forest, the two of them soon emerging from the trees and coming to a slight outcropping that overlooked a small mining settlement below.
This little innocuous settlement was the site of their latest mission.
Apparently some missing nin from the village hidden in the mist had been causing trouble, the man having effectively taken over a small mining settlement, using it as a base for him and his band of thugs and bandits. He was also, or at least according to the rumors they had heard the next town over, been burying the villagers who opposed him alive. And if that wasn't bad enough, the sick fuck apparently cried over their deaths as he did it.
Suffice to say, the mission had ended up attracting Naruto's attention as the leader of this rabble was strangely enough a somewhat well-known shinobi, and a rank shinobi at that, went by the name of Raiga Kurosuki. The man was apparently a former member of the Seven Swordsmen of the Mist and had a dangerous enough reputation to attract Naruto's interest. He also apparently had a 150,000 Ryo bounty on his head.
That was what Kin was more interested in, It was enough money for the two of them to live comfortably off for the next 6 months. Not that Kin was under any delusion that they would stop hunting bounties even if they did have that much money. No, killing this shinobi would just likely spur Naruto on to hunting down even more dangerous prey. Not that that bothered Kin that much, as the stronger shinobi they faced often had useful jutsu scrolls or tools she could loot off them. Plus she was hoping one day that she and Naruto would come across a bounty for whoever it was that sent those shinobi who destroyed her home and murdered her family. She only wished that the men had called their master by his name instead of just calling him the master, or that Naruto had left one alive so that they could interrogate him. Still though, Kin was content to wait for now, knowing as she did that one day she would track this master down, and then gut him or her like a pig. Naruto, oblivious to Kin's thoughts, continued forward, coming to a stop on the edge of the rock outcropping, his amber eyes lazily surveying the landscape before him.
"How many do you count?" Kin asked as came to standing next to him, glancing sideways at Naruto as she did so, knowing his eyesight and senses were far better than her own.
Naruto didn't respond at first, focusing as he counted the number of thugs and bandits in the small settlement. His senses spread out as he sensed the chakra within all of them, assessing the group to see whether they were more than the common thugs they appeared.
Currently the bandits were overseeing a number of civilians, probably people local to the area, as they were forced to work, breaking up and collecting rocks from around the mine. Overall none of them seemed that well armed, carrying with them a mixture of spears, swords and clubs, none of which seemed to be that good a quality. "Well?" Kin asked impatiently as she looked over at Naruto, before looking back down at the settlement.
"There is around 11 bandits down below, none of whom are shinobi, and around 24 civilians." Naruto replied, his amber eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his clawed hands resting on the rock outcropping in front of him as he surveyed the lower part of the settlement. Narrowing his eyes as he didn't sense the A-rank shinobi they had come here to hunt, Naruto then glanced up at a small collection of buildings built further up the mountain. The buildings were just out of range of his senses, but he was going to take a stab in the dark and say that this raiga kurosuki was somewhere further up the mountain. "I haven't been able to sense our target in the settlement below, it's all just common brigands down there." Kin scowled as she heard that, before she followed Naruto's gaze and saw the collection of ramshackle wooden buildings that were further up the mountain. "You reckon he's up there?"
"It seems likely," Naruto replied shortly, standing up straight as he did, his hands clenching and unclenching as he stared at the settlement below. A thoughtful expression spreading across his face, as he looked from the small settlement below to the building built further up the mountain. He could see a path running up from the village. It looked to be the only path leading up there, other than that it was all sheer rock faces. But then again, for someone trained to use chakra, a sheer rock face wasn't much an obstacle.
"So what do you want to do?" Kin asked shortly as she saw him looking from the village to the buildings above, guessing what was going through his head. Personally she would have preferred to attack He Village, but she was still somewhat new to this and was content to follow Naruto's lead. "Do we attack the village, or do you want to try and sneak past?" Naruto hummed slightly at that, a thoughtful look on his face as he came to his decision. "We attack the village, we kill all the thugs, doing it as silently as possible." Naruto began, a savage grin on his face, his eyes flashing with bloodthirst. "Then we go after Raiga. And the civilians?" Kin asked, a slight frown on her face, as she looked down at the settlement. Scowling as she saw how the locals were being forced to work by the thugs. Already she could feel anger building up within her, as she saw the strong abusing the weak.
"Put them under a genjutsu," Naruto replied, giving Kin a sideways glance as he did so. "Make them all unconscious, I don't want them getting in our way." Kin nodded at that, crouching down as she made to leap forward. Before she did though, Naruto grabbed her by the back of her shirt and dragged her back. "Make sure to do it silently. We don't want Raiga to know we are here until we want him to. I don't want him doing a runner, not yet," Naruto added as he made eye contact with Kin.
Yeah, I get it," Kin replied as she straightened her clothing, rolling her eyes as she did so. "This isn't my first time, you know," Kin added, before a slight smirk spread across her face. "At this anyway," she trailed off, before giving Naruto a wink. Naruto cocked an eyebrow as that, before he crouched low to the ground and leapt forward, his body a blur as he silently leapt from the rock outcropping into the valley below. "Ah, he's no fun." Kin grumbled as quickly followed after him. The slightest of smiles beginning to form across her face as she saw pursued him. For all his feral appearance and ruthlessness, she couldn't help but enjoy her time with Naruto. She still missed her family. That was a hole she didn't think could ever be filled. But at the same time she wasn't going to curl up and die. Naruto was part of the reason for that. Since traveling with him she had found a reason to go on and to get stronger. She had found content in the routine she shared with him. She had also learned to be proud of the things she accomplished, and hunger for the excitement the hunt gave her.
Naruto's lifestyle was very addictive. There was a freedom about it that being a part of a shinobi village would never compare with. Still, though, she wished she knew more about the silver-haired sage. She knew he was around her age, as surprising as that may be considering the fact he looked closer to 18 than 13. She knew he was raised in a forest by someone called Akila. She also knew he had master senjutsu. And that was about all she knew about him. Naruto wasn't the kind of person to talk about himself, and what little she did know was things she had wheedled out of him over the last 6 months. A slight frown passed across her face at that thought, before she pushed those feelings away. Instead, focusing on the task ahead, the both of them had just reached the outskirts of the settlement. Battle would soon be joined.
Come on, hurry up, a short man, with a scruffy black beard and a mop of greasy brown hair shouted, a nasty expression on his face as he watched the villagers working. We aren't paying you for nothing, you know.
The man followed this up with a loud laugh, something a number of his companions joined in on, as they passed around a wineskin.
Pawn, I don't think we're paying these guys. A tall skinny man, with shaggy brown hair and a vacant expression on his face said.
The now named Pawn turned to glare at the other man, a look of annoyance prominent on his face. That's the point of the joke, dumbass. Oh, the other man replied, nodding his head as he did so, before he paused and let out a laugh. Good one, Pawn. Pawn shook his head as he saw this. Sometimes, Lee. Sometimes you're so fucking stupid, I swear it's a miracle you remember how to breathe.
Ha, that's funny, Pawn. The now named Lee replied with a guffaw.
Pawn's expression was blank as he looked at the laughing Lee. I wasn't joking.
Oi, can you two just fucking get it over with? Another one of the thugs shouted up, taking his eyes off the toiling villagers as he did so. Otherwise Raiga will give you a funeral.
That shut all of the men up, all of them shifting uncomfortably, their eyes shifting to the upper portion of the village, further up the mountain.
Right you are, Pawn replied uncomfortably, coughing into his hand before turning back to the villagers. You lot hurry up, Raiga wants the mine running faster. The villagers below grumbled a bit at that but otherwise increased their pace. They had after all seen the cruelty of the one they called Raiga. It didn't matter who you were, whether you were one of his thugs or a villager, if you pissed him off he would kill you. And your death would be long, drawn out and terrible. Come on faster, you lazy fucks. Pawn shouted again, slamming the base of his spear into the ground to emphasize his words. He was about to speak again before he suddenly stopped, his eyes widening as he heard a faint whistling sound. Looking around, Pawn's vision began to blur, even as the sound of whistle began to reverberate around his head. What? Pawn tried to say, his head throbbing as his vision blurred even further. He soon stumbled to the ground, his hands slapping into wet mud as an overwhelming feeling of weariness came over him. All around the prone man the others were all similarly affected. Bandits and villagers all were falling to their knees, their heads throbbing and their gazes blurred. All the while the low whistling sound continued to sound out across the village. The sound was faint, barely audible, but even so it had succeeded in incapacitating nearly 40 people. You're getting better, Naruto spoke up, a look of faint surprise on his face as he saw all the disabled men and women around him. I know, Kin said, a slight grin on her face as she looked over at Naruto, the village once again becoming silent as she stopped whistling. Sound-based genjutsu, that was where Kin excelled. It was a talent she had first learned from her father along with standard genjutsu techniques, but had since developed whilst in Naruto's company. Using sound as a base for casting genjutsu was in her opinion somewhat of a niche technique, far more subtle than standard genjutsu techniques. Far more versatile too. It's not exactly silent though, is it? Naruto asked in amusement as he walked into the village, glancing briefly over at the incapacitated villagers, before looking over at the bandits. They were all beginning to recover. It was slow, but a couple were slowly pushing themselves to their feet. Kin shrugged in response.
unsheathing her tanto as she approached one of the hunched-over thugs. Grabbing the disorientated man by the back of his head, Kin yanked him backwards, exposing his throat as she slashed her tanto across it, leaving a gaping bloody wound. I was as quiet as I could be. Besides, it was so quiet I doubt any of the ones up top will have heard. Naruto rolled his eyes at that, barely glancing down as he grabbed one of the thugs by the head and snapped his neck, barely straining as the man's spine let out a sickening crunching noise as his head twisted 180 degrees. You doubt it? That's the point I am trying to make. Some shinobi have enhanced hearing and might have heard you. You always have to be cautious, if not you could find yourself getting ambushed.
Yeah, I get it. Kin replied as she thrust her tanto into the back of one of the bandits' skulls, felling him instantly. Glancing round, she noticed that the rest were nearly back on their feet, the villagers not far behind.
Can you put the villagers to sleep? Naruto asked as he too noticed what was going on. Twisting around, his claws gleamed crimson as he tore through the throat of two of the bandits, before thrusting his hand through the chest of a third.
Kin nodded as she heard him, pursing her lips as she began to whistle again, the tune very slightly different this time. The pitch was still quiet, but it was also notably several octaves higher, barely on the spectrum of human hearing. Though it was still on the spectrum of Naruto's hearing apparently, as she noticed him flinch a little as she whistled. Seeing this, she made a note to herself that high-pitched noises seemed to irritate him. It may come in useful the next time they sparred. She was still hoping to get a proper hit on him. So far she had only managed to strike his hands when he was blocking her. The instant Kin stared whistling again, the rest of the people in the area all froze. All of them freezing in place for a moment before their eyes rolled up into the back of their heads as they slumped forward, now all unconscious.
Why didn't you do that the first time? Naruto asked curiously as he shook his right hand, flicking off crimson flecks of blood as he looked around him. All the bandits were now dead, whilst all the villagers were passed out in the mud below. Well, it wouldn't be right if we killed those bandits in their sleep. Kin replied with a shrug as she wiped the blood off of her tanto, using the clothing of one of the dead men to do so, before she wandered over to Naruto.
Naruto shrugged at that. He could see her point. There was no sport in killing sleeping prey. Then again, neither was there much sport in killing disorientated men, but at least they had a chance. Not that the outcome would have been any different. No, Kin's genjutsu were deadly, even he had temporarily succumbed to some of them. It would take a skilled shinobi to throw off some of the more deadly ones from her repertoire.
Right. Well, come on then. We need to head up and kill Raiga, Naruto said as he gave the area one more glance, before he began to head for the mountain path. His senses still flared just in case anyone attempted to spy on or ambush them. Kin hummed in response, looking around the area too, as she looked to see if there was any good loot she could take. Not that she expected much from a small, poor mining settlement like this. Seeing that there was none, she ended up turning and running after Naruto as he began to run up the mountain path, his movements fluid and silent. A few minutes later found both Kin and Naruto crouched on a rock outcropping, looking down at Raiga Kurosaki as he wept at a freshly turned grave, a number of his followers standing around him wearing funeral clothing watching the dangerous shinobi's theatrics. It seemed Raiga had gone ahead and murdered another person, burying them alive as a form of execution. It was truly a nasty way to go. Okay, so here is the plan. I go kill Raiga whilst you kill the others, Naruto said quietly, his eyes fixed on Raiga's back. Narrowed as he sensed not just Raiga's chakra, but another source that seemed to be attached to the swordsman's back. It was a person that much was obvious to Naruto, and judging by the way their chakras circulated through their body and into their eyes, it was a person with a dojutsu. Which meant that this was going to be harder than Naruto thought, as from what little he knew of eye-based bloodline abilities, they were a pain in the ass. He had heard about a couple of bloodlines like that and all of them sounded like an annoyance. Still though, this might give him a bit of practice fighting against dojutsu. They should be quite easy for you to finish off. Once you have done that, I want you to hold back. I want to test myself against this Raiga, see how my swordsmanship fares against his. Naruto continued, not looking at Kin as he continued to watch Raiga, making sure as he did that the two of them had not been noticed. Is that all right with you? Yeah, sure, do what you want. You go first and then I'll follow, Kin replied, confident that she could take down the untrained bandits. As for letting Naruto handle the A-rank shinobi, well, she had no problem with that either. Naruto nodded at that, his amber eyes narrowing and his claws sinking into the rock at his feet as he prepared to jump. Without a sound, Naruto leapt forward, leaping several meters into the air before he rapidly descended on the group below. Behind him he could sense Kin already moving, the girl charging forward on foot, her tanto in one hand and her chakra already beginning to churn as she prepared to use a genjutsu. As Naruto descended, he took note of the fact that Raiga turned to face him, his eyes widening before an ugly sneer crept across his face. His hands already moving for his blades, as he made to unsheathe them. Raiga already beginning to move as he jumped backwards.
Naruto's eyes narrowed as he saw Raiga's actions. Even as he crashed into the ground, the impact making it crater at his feet. The instant he landed, Naruto lunged forward, straight away going on the attack, his blood burning in his veins.
Raiga, however, had already moved away, his movements fast as he leapt back, putting some space between him and Naruto. The sneer on his face growing, as his dull red eyes met Naruto's glowing amber ones. The arrogance they held plain to see. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, kid," Raiga snarled, setting his feet as he watched Naruto turn to face him, a feral grin spreading across his face and his amber eyes gleaming with challenge as he surveyed the former hidden swordsman of the mist. Naruto grinned as he looked over at Raiga. It seemed like Naruto had been right when he thought fighting against a dojutsu user, or at least someone who was allied with one, would be tricky. Somehow Raiga had been able to sense Naruto's attack, which, considering Naruto's speed and stealth, was a surprising. Or at least the person on Raiga's back had been able to sense Naruto, a person who seemed to be hiding in a large canvas bag. Seeing this, Naruto assumed the dojutsu user could see through the canvas material, that or he could sense Naruto's chakra. Either way, he had seen Naruto coming and had warned Raiga.
After all, from Raiga's bingo book entry, he had elite level skill with his blades and his lightning jutsu, but in terms of his other shinobi skills he was barely Junin level. That being said, Naruto was not too perturbed by this, as he had expected something along these lines happening the moment he had identified that Raiga had a partner. Shifting his feet, Naruto brought his hand up and grasped the hilt of his sword, slowly drawing the wickedly sharp blade. A feral grin spreading across his face. Yes, Naruto had no problem at all with this turn of events. As a former seven swordsman of the Hidden Mist, Raiga had somewhat of a reputation as a skilled swordsman. Already Naruto could feel his blood racing, and the thrill of battle rising up within him as he prepared to test his skills with a sword against Raiga. As Naruto was doing this, Kin had already engaged the rest of the bandits. Her tanto in hand as she bobbed and weaved through them, slashing at exposed limbs. All the while she let out a low whistle, disorientating her opponents as she quickly cut through them. Her shinobi-based skills making short work of the untrained thugs and brigands. Seeing this, Naruto smirked. The girl really had gotten stronger. With that in mind, it was time Naruto pulled his own weight. Darting forward, Naruto, his sword held in his right hand, he quickly engaged Raiga. His amber eyes gleaming in excitement as he saw that the man had drawn his own blades, the Kiba blade. A set of finely crafted twin blades that sparked with lightning as he lunged at Naruto, straight away going for a decapitation.
Naruto took a step back, his eyes narrowing as he felt the concentrated lightning chakra flowing through those blades.
Dodging Raiga's first swing, Naruto then lunged forward, his blade a blur as he went for a downward slash at Raiga, which was followed by a swift set of rapid lunges and slashes, each strike flowing into the next as he began pushing Raiga back. Naruto's feet almost dancing across the ground, his blade a blur as he struck with both immense speed and strength, quickly overwhelming the slower and weaker Raiga. A snarl spread across Raiga's face as he faced this onslaught. His skill with the twin blades was admirable, using the lightning flowing through them to his advantage as he defended himself, releasing bolts of lightning at Naruto with every clash of their blades. Not that this deterred Naruto, as his sword did not conduct Raiga's lightning, and the bolts Raiga did send out were easily avoided as he used the advantage Sage Mode gave him to sense the lightning chakra as it was released, giving him an almost precognitive ability to avoid Raiga's attempts to paralyze and shock him with the stray blasts of lightning. Undeterred by Raiga's counterattacks, Naruto took another step forward, taking a strong base as he parried away Raiga's Kiba blades. Before he darted forward with a swift lunge, his blade scoring a bloody wound on Raiga's shoulder. It would have impaled the man, but at the last second he had dodged, throwing his body to the side. Scowling as he saw this, Naruto once again scowled at the lump on Raiga's back.
The moment before he had struck Raiga, he had heard a whispered warning being given to the man. It was because of this that the man had survived what would have been a crippling blow had it landed. Letting out a slight growl, Naruto rushed forward, once again engaging Raiga as he lashed out with his sword, making the man backpedal as Naruto bowled forwards. A look of frustration entering Raiga's eyes as he swung both of his blades sideways at Naruto, probably hoping to make him back off and give Raiga more space to compose himself. It didn't work though, as Naruto ducked down low, avoiding the wide sweeping blades and instead delivering a solid kick to Raiga's right leg, causing it to collapse under him before Naruto followed it up with a slash of his sword. Raiga only just managing to dodge as the blade cut through his clothing and bit into his skin, leaving a bloody trench running from his left hip to his right shoulder. Naruto then followed this up with a light kick to Raiga's chest that sent him staggering backwards, the kiba blades falling out of his loosened grip as he instead clasped the bloody wound on his chest.
With Raiga staggering backward from his silver-haired attacker, Raiga clasped to the bloody wound across his torso, his eyes widening as saw his attacker stand up straight again. His sword held lazily at his side, and his amber eyes locked hungrily on Raiga.
Seeing this, Raiga's mouth went dry, fear beginning to grow within him as he saw his opponent didn't even look out to breathe. This foe was beyond him, he knew that much. He was faster, stronger and more skilled than him, Raiga could tell that. Just as he could tell the only reason he wasn't already was because this man, for whatever reason, was toying with him. Pushing his fear away for now, Raiga instead channeled his chakra to his wounds, stifling the blood flow and soothed the pain from the wounds as he did so. It was a temporary measure, but hopefully it would allow him to continue on long enough to at least escape this attacker. "What do you see, Renmara?" Raiga muttered as he took a step back, his eyes flickering to his kiba blades that lay in the mud behind his assailant, assessing the likelihood of recovering them.
A soft voice replied back, the voice coming from the large backpack he had on his back. Raiga, he's too powerful for you to fight. I've never seen anyone with this much chakra before, he's not human, he's a monster, Raiga. We need to run now or he will kill us, we need to flee.
I know, but it's not that easy. What about a genjutsu? Can your eyes cast one on him? Raiga asked, his eyes narrowed as he tried to think up a strategy.
Renmara was correct, whoever this was, Raiga was out of his league. And with the wounds Raiga had already suffered, he was unlikely to be able to fight his way out of this, which meant he would have to rely on Renmara using his dojutsu to cast an irresistible genjutsu on the man. That should hopefully buy them enough time to grab the kiba blades and escape. But for that to happen, Renmara would have to make eye contact with the feral-looking man. Renmara made to reply, but before he could, his eyes widened and he instead shouted a warning to his friend, "Raiga, he's coming, get down." Raiga, through instinct, did what Renmara said, lunging into a low crouch. Just in time as he saw the man's blade slice through the air overhead, the air thrumming as it did so. Rolling to the side, he once again dodged as the silver-haired man's clawed foot slammed into the ground, followed by his blade. Rolling to his feet, Raiga looked up in shock, only to find himself looking at a set of glowing amber eyes. With Naruto. Naruto scowled as Raiga once again seemed to almost predict his attack. The child on his back was the reason. Naruto knew this now after he had listened into the brief conversation the two of them had had. His eyes too appeared allowed him to see Naruto's attacks even through the canvas covering the boy. Not only that, but from what Raiga said, they also seemed to be able to cast eye-based genjutsu. Naruto had never heard of a set of dojutsu like this, but at the moment it sounded like some kind of cross between the Hyuga clan's famous Byakugan and the Uchiha clan's legendary Sharingan. Either way, it was powerful. Not missing a beat, Naruto leapt forward, his blade held at the ready as he once again engaged Raiga. The man avoided his first strike, and then his second. But his third struck Raiga straight in the chest, Naruto's 4-foot-long blade piercing through Raiga's chest and through the person on his back. Blood bubbled from Raiga's mouth as he looked at Naruto in surprise, confused red eyes meeting glowing amber. Naruto just gazed levelly at him for a moment, before he twisted his blade and wrenched it out of Raiga's chest. With a dull thud, Raiga collapsed backward, his eyes wide and vacant. "Well, you took your time." A glib voice spoke up from behind Naruto, prompting him to turn around and smirk at the waiting kin. Noting as he did the dozen or so dead bodies lying behind her, most of whom had their throats cut. "I was enjoying myself," Naruto replied with a shrug,
idly reaching down and tearing off a part of Raiga's clothing before he used it to wipe the blood of his blade. How did your fight go?
It was easy, none of them had any real skills to speak of. Kin replied with a nonchalant shrug, her gaze instead resting on Raiga's dead body. What about yours? Did he put up much of a fight? Not really, he was a mediocre swordsman at best, mainly relying on the Kiba blade's abilities. Naruto replied in disappointment, glancing at the fallen blades that were lying in the mud a few feet away. The wielder of them might have been incompetent, but the blades themselves were powerful. Naruto would make sure to take them with him when he left. He also had a partner. A partner? Kin questioned, her brow furrowed in confusion as she scanned the area looking for another dead shinobi.
Seeing this, Naruto shrugged before he used his foot to kick Raiga's body over, so it was now lying on its front.
Kin looked over curiously at Naruto as he did that. Yeah, he had some kid with a set of dojutsu on his back. The kid was able to see and read my attacks and was warning Raiga about them. Ended up making the fight longer than it should have been. Naruto replied absent-mindedly as he reached down and ripped the backpack of Raiga's back, the material tearing away to reveal a frail-looking boy on his back. The kid looked to be around 12 or 13 years old, with very apple skin and thin brittle-looking limbs. Not that that mattered as the boy was dead, his eyes staring blankly straight ahead. A large bloody wound in his chest formed Naruto's sword. Turning his body, Naruto looked closely at his dead eyes, taking note as he did of the chakra that was slowly flowing out of them, his body no longer constantly providing it now he was dead. This kid's dojutsu, Naruto said with a frown as he looked up at Kin, noting the curiosity on her face as she looked at the kid's red eyes. It was some kind of variant of a Sharingan or a Byakugan, I am not sure. Either way, it allowed him to see through this bag in all directions and help Raiga in tracking my movements and predicting my attacks. It also apparently could cast genjutsu, though I didn't see him dong it.
Poor kid. Kin said as she looked down at the boy, a bit of pity in her eyes. Do you reckon Raiga forced him to help him? Naruto shrugged at that. Can't say for sure, but the kid seemed more than happy to help Raiga, or at least that was what I heard.
Kin sighed at that before nodding. It was a shame someone so young had to die, but if he had been willingly helping a monster like Raiga, someone who buried people alive and took pleasure from it, then maybe it was better of that they were dead. What do we do now? Kin asked as she once again looked around the area, before looking back at Naruto. Naruto hummed at that, a thoughtful expression crossing his face, before he swung his blade up and down, decapitating Raiga's dead body. With that done, he then pulled a scroll from out of his coat pocket, unrolling it as he did so before he first sealed up Raiga's decapitated head for the bounty. Then he walked over and grabbed the Kiba blades, sealed them inside the scroll too. With that done, Naruto rolled the scroll back up and then shoved it into his pocket. With that done, Naruto then turned to Kin, a curious expression on his face. Hey Kin, how good are your medical ninjutsu skills? Kin frowned at this question, not sure where it was coming from, but answering it anyway. They're decent enough, why? Naruto paused for a second, looking down at the corpses of Raiga and the Renmara for a second before looking up at Kin, a determined expression on his face. Because I am going to implant those dojutsu, and I want you to help. With Kin rolled her shoulder irritably, a scowl on her face as she looked around the heavily wooded forest she was currently in. It had been a month and a half since she and Naruto had taken down Raiga Kurosaki and cashed in his head. In the end, it had turned out the money they had gained from claiming his bounty was very useful. After all, Naruto had gotten it into his head that it would be a good idea to implant some random dojutsu into his head, putting the pressure on Kin as he did so, as he had also asked her to do the implanting, something she had no prior experience with. Of course, this hadn't bothered Naruto, which meant that the moment they had cashed in Raiga's bounty, they had gone back to Clover Town and used some of the money to rent out a room in the Lusty Leopard. Once there, Naruto had insisted that they do the implantation. After all, he didn't have a sealing scroll that could preserve human remains for long. Maybe a week at most, and even then there would be some deterioration. Well, either way, they had gone ahead with the implantation, Naruto lying on the bed gritting his teeth as he stoically bore her, removing first his right eye, a surprisingly clean thing if done properly. Not that it was any less unpleasant for Kin, but she bore it. After removing his right eye, she had then implanted the boy, Renmara's eye, the smaller orb easily fitting within Naruto's empty socket. Surprisingly, Kin had needed to do very little healing after that, as Naruto it appeared had some kind of healing factor. Whether that was to do with his sage mode or something else, Kin wasn't sure. All she knew was that the moment she inserted Rinmara's dojutsu in Naruto, his body had begun to start healing, immediately assimilating the eye into Naruto's body. In fact, Kin had needed to do very little after that, which was probably good as she only knew how to do blunt force healing and not the more complicated things. She was only adept at medical ninjutsu at best after all.
After she had done the first eye, the second one had been just as easy, though still a less than pleasant task. No, the implantation of the dojutsu had not been that bad, it had been quick and relatively painless.
It was the part after that had been a pain. When Naruto had sat up after his healing had finished, he had become very disorientated. At first he had struggled to control the eyes, as he now found that he could see through walls and could in fact see chakra, an effect that was only made worse by the fact he could also censor chakra due to his sage mode, as now his senses were being totally overloaded.
In the end, it had taken Naruto close to 3 weeks to get a handle on the eyes, even if it was just the basics like activating them and deactivating them.
As well as handling their latent abilities like the ability to predict movements and ability to see through practically anything. He hadn't even tried to cast genjutsu with them yet. This in itself wasn't bad, as it made Naruto only more deadly than he already was. Which was both frightening and brilliant. Though she would be interested to see how he would develop once he learned how to cast eye-based genjutsu.
But it did mean that Naruto hadn't been able to work for 3 weeks, which meant they had had to dip into their savings to pay for the room, and the food and drink. Which, considering just how great Naruto's metabolism was, meant they ended up blowing through a large chunk of their savings. Living after all was by no means cheap, especially when you were having to rent out a room and eat out most nights.
Still, they had eventually gotten back to work, the two of them pretty much working non-stop. Naruto wanting to master his new eyes as fast as he could, so that he could begin to hunt down larger prey. Which basically meant that he was feeling antsy and wanted to try his hand against stronger shinobi, i.e. high A-class and S-class shinobi.
It was because of this that Kin currently found herself crouched on the branch of a tree, her muscles feeling sore after having spent the last 2 weeks constantly taking on missions. All of which were part of a military campaign that they had been hired to assist with.
Naruto, through his mercenary contacts at the Lusty Leopard, had gotten them what at first had seemed like a pretty sweet gig. They had been hired alongside another few dozen mercenaries, bounty hunters, exiled samurai etc. by the daimyo of the Land of Woods to help him liberate the Land of Woods from some kind of enemy shinobi incursion. As apparently a group of mysterious shinobi had been causing a ruckus and he had somehow found out and now wanted them gone.
Suffice to say, when Kin had first heard of the mission, she had been excited.
After all, this might have given her some leads as to who had been the master of the shinobi who had murdered her family and kidnapped her. So far though she had had no luck. The few enemy shinobi she had managed to ensnare with her genjutsu had died before they talked. They had some kind of seal on their tongue that stopped them from giving away information. It was something that neither Kin nor Naruto knew what to do about. It had been frustrating for Kin, which had only made the weeks on non-stop fighting and missions even more annoying.
Mostly what she and Naruto did was protect the daimyo's soldiers from the skilled shinobi, who a missing nin who had worked with them had called roots. Apparently some former Konoha Black Ops group who were supposed to have been disbanded decades ago, but obviously hadn't.
Either way, whilst Naruto, Kin and the others protected the main army, the daimyo's elite group of chakra-trained samurai and normal soldiers methodically destroyed the root bases with massive amounts of explosive notes. Naruto, Kin and the others taking on the root shinobi, whilst the rest of the army fought the bandits that the root Anbu had stirred up and equipped.
Kin had to admit that the root Anbu she had fought were skilled. More than once she had been put on the back foot, having to struggle as she found herself fighting against multiple, quickly moving silent opponents. In the end though she always triumphed, her well-honed genjutsu skill allowing her to disorientate them long enough for her to strike them down with her tanto. Others amongst them though had not been so lucky. Of the 30-odd mercenaries the daimyo had hired, at least 20 of them were dead now and another couple had left claiming the mission was too dangerous or not worth the money that was being offered. Of course, whilst Kin and the others struggled, Naruto did not seem to have the same problem. Bulldozing through any root shinobi stupid to get in his way, none of their attacks being able to keep up with his speed, durability and his new ability to predict attacks. His constant use of the eyes,
which his unique healing factor had seemed to seamlessly assimilate, had gotten so fluid he had become an almost unstoppable juggernaut.
Kin was soon broken out of her memories by the call of one of the samurai that served in the Land of Forest's army.
His sudden shout almost catching Kin by surprise, as she had been stoically gazing out at the surrounding forest acting as one sentinels. A job Naruto had volunteered her for, claiming it would help fine-tune her sensory skills. Of course what he had meant actually was that he didn't want to sit on a branch all day, and so had instead volunteered her to do so he wouldn't have to. Suffice to say she would get him back for this. "Hey, Kin, Zaji wants to see you in the command tent, Naruto is already there." Suzaku shouted up to her, the brown-haired samurai not knowing the meaning of subtlety as he stood below the tree wearing his bulky green samurai armor. Smiling up at her as he casually gave away her well-hidden position.
Rolling her eyes in irritation, Kin repressed the urge to snap at him. Knowing as she did that he didn't know any better and her taking out her irritation at her weariness on him wasn't fair. No, that was what Naruto was there for. Though knowing the sage he likely wouldn't notice or care, which took away most of the satisfaction, not all of it though.
"Thanks Suzaku, I'll go find Naruto and see what he wants," Kin replied as she rolled her shoulder again before she leapt down from her perch in the tree, falling the 15 feet to the leafy ground without a sound, after which she proceeded to sweep past Suzaku and into the camp, easily wending her way through the rows of tents and occasional patrols as she headed for the main tent in the center of the camp where both Naruto and Zaji, the commander of the daimyo's army, were waiting. With Naruto grumbling irritably, Naruto once again turned to look out of the tent, his amber eyes turning red as he activated his dojutsu, allowing him to see through the thick canvas and through another 20 or so tents. A slight smile passed across his face as he saw Kin approaching, his attractive partner confidently moving through the crowds and tents as she approached the command tent. The girl was quite comfortably wearing a cuirass and right pauldron she had taken from a dead samurai, over the top of her mesh undershirt and her black overshirt. Her now knee-length silky black hair now plaited and fell down her back. Her tanto was still belted to her waist along with her kunai and senbon pouches. A confident look was also present on her face as she walked through the camp of older and more experienced soldiers and samurai, not at all daunted as she knew herself to be on the level or higher. Cutting off his chakra to his eyes, the glowing red color faded to his usual amber color, signifying that he was still using his sage mode. It appeared that even though he had replaced his eyes with those of another, they were still a glowing amber, unless he activated his dojutsu, at which point they became a glowing red color. This was no doubt due to the fact that the vulpine features, claws, shaggy sliver hair and amber eyes were all features brought about by his constant use of sage mode and his connection to the direwolf clan through their summoning scroll, to the point at which it had permanently begun to mutate his body. Not that Naruto was complaining, he always thought his amber eyes were badass. Far more striking than the baby blue color they had been in his youth, before he had begun training to be a sage. They certainly added to his intimidation factor, something that was useful when it came to corralling prey. Turning back to Zaji, a very tall, heavy-set samurai in his early 30s, a mass of muscle and power clad in incredibly ornate sliver armor. Not that his size really bothered Naruto, as he instead gave the impatient-looking army commander a bored look before saying, "She's just coming." "Good," Zaji replied impatiently, not bothering to ask how Naruto knew. Naruto was an odd one, not that that bothered Zaji. As long as he could fight and obey orders, that was all that mattered, and Naruto could surely fight. The man was an absolute monster. Obeying orders though, he was not quite as good at that. Still though, as long as the daimyo kept the money coming and Zaji phrased his commands the right way, they made do. Still though the man could be a pain in the ass, he refused to do solo missions and always insisted on bringing his partner Kin along. Not that that bothered Zaji, the girl was formidable in her own right, plus she was a lot easier to deal with than the brusque and stubborn Naruto. The fact she was quite the looker was only a bonus, though considering he had seen Naruto rip a shinobi's spine out with his bare hand, he might keep that opinion to himself. A minute or so later found Kin entering the command tent, sweeping past the two samurai who guard the tent entrance without stopping. Instead she just walked up to where Naruto, Zaji and a couple of others were waiting around a table covered in maps. Idly sidling in next to Naruto, making sure to jam her elbow into his ribs as she did so. Not that Naruto showed any sign of noticing. Instead he just gave her a faint smile, his sharp canines just poking out from the bottom of his lips. A smile that grew when he saw the sour face Kin gave him, no doubt a bit pissed off that he had volunteered her to sentry duty. To be fair though, he had wanted to sleep, whilst she had insisted on training. Kin having wanted to try and practice her genjutsu on someone with dojutsu, even if the two of them didn't know the full capabilities of the ones Naruto now carried.
Normally Naruto would have humored her, after all he always did love a good fight even if it was a spar. Unfortunately though, he had just come back from a brutal mission and was looking forward to a nap. Hence the fobbing her off and making her sit on a branch staring out at the forest for 3 hours.
So what's the new job? Naruto asked bluntly, cutting straight to the chase now Kin was here. Already impatient to get on with it, he had rested and was now completely re-energized, and now Kin was here, there was no more need to wait.
Yes, one last job, Zaji said, sending Naruto a sour look this time. After all, it was his insistence on waiting for Kin that delayed them for 5 minutes. Still though, he didn't see the point in getting into an argument over something so trivial. Especially with someone so prickly and stubborn.
We are currently this close, Zaji continued as he held up 2 fingers not even an inch apart to signify just how close they were, to purging those accursed root shinobi from the land of woods, thanks in no small part to you two. But their last base is heavily defended. Too heavily defended for any of my men, and probably even you too. That's why I've hired some more outside help for this one. He came highly recommended as a demolitions expert from a good friend. He should be joining us shortly.
With that said, Zaji strode out of the tent, the others following him as it appeared he was going to meet this new hire.
Naruto's eyes narrowed as he heard how Zaji had hired more help. After all, he was pretty confident he and Kin could deal with this last base. Still though, as long as the daimyo kept paying, he would deal with it. After all, this was just a job to him. He had not special connection to this country or these people, they were just clients and would remain so until the job was done. A few moments later Naruto suddenly frowned, his eyes flashing red as he channeled chakra to them before turning around, his brow furrowing even further as he sensed something strange approaching. His sensory abilities courtesy of his sage mode were pretty considerable, not quite on a par with the toad sages from what Akila had told him, but far better than those of a normal sensor shinobi.
The chakra he was currently sensing was unlike anything he had ever felt. It was clearly human in nature, but was shaped vaguely like a bird. A very large bird. This was an oddity in itself, especially since the chakra felt incredibly unstable. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto glanced up, his dojutsu focusing on the larger-than-normal mass of chakra approaching, allowing him to see that the new arrival was riding on top of some kind of bird. At first Naruto thought it could be a summon, or some similar creature, but as it drew closer he began to doubt that it was a summon.
It didn't feel like a summon though. Naruto did begin to think that the unstable chakra he could sense could very well be how this demolitions expert, well, demolished things. Besides him, Zaji and Kin followed Naruto's gaze as he looked up, the two of them only seeing an empty sky. A minute or so passed before a large hawk appeared out of the clouds, the bird continuing to grow as it approached them. The creature a startlingly white color that stuck out against the backdrop of the light blue sky. As the bird drew closer, revealing its size and color to the rest of the group, Naruto instead focused on the person who he both sensed and saw was riding atop the bird. It was a man, who looked to be around 14 or 15 years old, not much older than himself. The teen had very long blonde hair that went halfway down his back, with one long bang covering the left side of his face. He was wearing a red-colored jacket over the top of a mesh shirt, with gray shinobi pants and simple black sandals. Most notably to Naruto though was the rock shinobi forehead protector he was wearing, the symbol for the rock village having a line gouged into it, signifying that he was a missing nin, a rogue shinobi. As his ride descended, the teen crossed his arms in front of him, a distinctly confident look on his face as the bird swooped lower to the ground. The look turning smug as he saw how many people in the camp were staring up at him in awe. Naruto however just looked distinctly unimpressed. Kin, who was by his side, shared his opinion. After all, the teen might be a missing nin, but neither of them had ever seen him in any of the bingo books, so he must either be very new or just not that important. Either way, he had no right to look that confident. Not until he had made his way onto Naruto's list of soon-to-be prey, which nowadays only consisted of S-class shinobi. Shinobi who he had not quite worked his way up to hunting yet. The moment the bird came within hearing distance, the teen called out, his voice loud and brash. I'm here for the job, yeah. Are you Zaji? Naruto and Kin shared a look of amusement at that. It seemed the boy was confident. It would be interesting to see if he could prove that his confidence had merit. Indeed I am. Are you the Deidara that my friend recommended? Zaji responded, not at all bothered by the youth's brashness. After all, he had to deal with cocky mercenaries all the time. The land of forest often branching out and hiring them. After all, as a small country, their armed forces was only so big. Of course I am, yeah. So you decided to buy some of my art to cause some havoc. Smart move, yeah, the newly introduced Deidara said as his art continued to descend. Before, with a cocky smirk, Deidara stepped off of it and onto solid ground, so he was now facing Naruto, Kin and Zaji. Art. Kin spoke up, a bemused expression on her face as she heard Deidara's manner of speaking. That's what my ninjutsu is, a noble and refined art. Deidara replied, a large spreading across his face as he focused in on the pretty black-haired girl, ignoring the others for now as he saw an opportunity to show off. Holding his hand out, he revealed a small clay spider that lay innocuously on his upturned palm, which oddly enough had a mouth embedded in it, teeth, tongue, and all. Much to all three of their surprise as they saw the mouth on his palm grin at them. Look, such refined lines, and a form that pursues two-dimensional deform. This is art, but that's not all there is to my art. My creations flow, yeah. Like this, it's simply molded clay. But my art explodes, and when it explodes it becomes sublime, and for the first time, the essence of my creation appears, yeah. That instant of sublimation is when true art can really exist. True art is an explosion, yeah. Naruto blinked as he heard that before turning to look at Kin, the girl immediately interpreting his expression to say, I want to punch this little shit in the face. Seeing the look, Kin shook her head before sending him a pointed expression of her own that he interpreted to say, man up and don't lose your temper with the weirdo. Now, as much as I love explaining art to the uneducated, we should probably have this schmuck leave so you can tell me what needs an artistic renovation, yeah. Deidara loudly, flamboyantly gesturing to Naruto as the uneducated in the room. Naruto's once amber eyes flashing with annoyance, even as his clawed hands curled into fists.
The eye candy can stay though. Deidara unwisely tacked on, oblivious to Naruto growing temper.
Kin cocked an eyebrow as she heard that, quite amused to be referred to as eye candy. Though knowing she would be even more amused when Naruto lost his temper. After all, whilst on a hunt or on a mission, Naruto might be a cold, calm killer, when he wasn't as patient or as calm. Zaji winced slightly as he heard Deidara's comment, warily eyeing Naruto as he did so. Luckily though, the feral man seemed to be keeping his cool.
Actually, Naruto here will be working with you, as will the girl, Kin. Your job, Deidara, will to be destroying the physical structure of this base.
Zaji said as he gestured for the group to follow him into the tent, before he approached the map and pointed at the location of the root shinobi's last base. The others all following him, Kin and Naruto side by side and Deidara strutting forwards in front of them, apparently unconcerned about how he was coming across with his new allies. Instead, he merely looked at the location of the base before glancing at a few rough sketches the scouts had managed to make of the parts of it they could see. The teen forgetting about his ego for the moment as he instead focused on the job at hand. Whilst you are doing that, Naruto and Kin will be in charge of the personnel in the base. Can you three handle it? Zaji continued, looking between Deidara, who was still looking at the maps on the table, and Naruto, who had seemed to have reined himself in and was simply standing at the edge of the table, a bored look on his face. Finally he glanced over at Kin, who had also approached the table, where she had begun leafing through what information they had managed to gather on the enemy. I can, but I don't know about these punks, so don't come crying to me if they end up as an artistic smear on the ground, yeah. Deidara said offhandedly as he glanced away from the table, all the information now carefully filed away in his memories. A look of dark amusement crossed over Naruto's faces as he looked over at Deidara, his canines protruding from his mouth into an amused smirk. If this fool can so much as scratch me with his art, I'll give him all the money I make for this job. Deidara's lips quirked in amusement at that, a lazy look on his face as he looked Naruto up and down, noting his large muscled form, feral features, sinister glowing amber eyes, claw-like nails and the hilt of a sword he could see just poking out over his shoulder. Yes, the man looked formidable, but he also looked like a common berserker. Deidara didn't rate Naruto's chances against his explosive art. Kin, seeing the way the two were acting, just rolled her eyes, muttering under her breath, "Boys."
"I'll take that as a yes," Zaji said carefully as he looked between the cocky-looking Deidara, the exasperated-looking Kin and the darkly amused Naruto. "I'll leave you to it. Remember though, if the job isn't finished, you won't get paid." Yeah, no problem," Naruto said as he glanced over at Kin, the two sharing a look before he set off heading for the nearby woods, Kin quickly following after him. Deidara scoffed as he saw the two run into the forest heading for the base, shaking his head in amusement, before he once again mounted his claybird and followed after them. Within the root base, Torun would be frustrated if Lord Danzo's harsh training hadn't removed all emotion from him. He had been sent to this backwoods country to quell a sudden move to oust Danzo's influence in this country. It should have taken around 50 root Anbu to stop the move by assassinating key figures in the government and military. The daimyo's army didn't even have a single shinobi among them and barely 100 samurai.
Most of the troops didn't even know how to use their chakra, and the ones that did were weak and only used bastardized techniques that had been scavenged from the shinobi villages. Against a trained and experienced shinobi, the forces were paltry. After all, Lord Danzo had ordered Torun and Fu to personally wipe out any powerful groups that could resist them, when they had first begun to extend the root organization into the land of forests.
No. Lord Danzo's elite root ninja were currently fighting samurai, mercenaries and common soldiers, and worse still, they were losing. While the land of forests forces didn't have a single ninja, Ryo was apparently no object to the surprisingly well-funded country. So much so that they had hired missing nin and the like, to guard both the daimyo and to assist in the assault and the root forces. Torun couldn't even be angry at the missing nin that the Land of Woods had hired, both because he literally couldn't and because even missing nin had to earn money.
This of course did not translate to mercy when in combat. The mission comes first after all, and it was because of those same missing nin that Torun and 50 other root shinobi had been assigned to join the forces stationed in the Land of Forests on this pathetic little assignment in the middle of nowhere, when he would be of more use serving Lord Danzo back in the Hidden Leaf.
Torun had tried to muster the forces and just end this charade already so he could return to Lord Danzo's side, but they had apparently hired some rather competent shinobi. So much so that a large chunk of Lord Danzo's forces had been wiped out and the root's grip on the country was almost lost. Still, all was not lost yet. All it would take would be to kill the missing nin and then the rest would fall. To do that though, he would have to contact Lord Danzo and request reinforcements. Something his master would not appreciate, as he had already sent more shinobi here than he had wanted to. Torun was just thinking over how he could use the forces he still had to lure them out and into an ambush when the ceiling suddenly shook, dust falling from the ceiling and cracks beginning to appear overhead. Realizing that this either meant an enemy attack or an earthquake, Torun was forced to make a quick decision. If it was an enemy attack, they would want to stick to the base, but remaining underground during an earthquake would kill them all as surely as an army of enemy shinobi. Deciding that the rebels couldn't have the kind of firepower required to make him feel the shock several dozen feet below the earth, Torun quickly ordered his fellow root members out of the subterranean base. As Torun arrived at the entrance to the root's last base in the country, he noticed that the others had yet to exit the doors. "What seems to be the issue?" Torun asked, his voice coming out cold and monotone as he tried to determine what the issue was.
"Sir, one of the sensors detected several large chakra sources outside. We determined that they are the source of the tremors. Awaiting further orders," one of the more experienced root members informed him, his tone of voice almost indistinguishable from Torun's as she turned to look emotionlessly at his captain. Just as Torun was about to order the squads back to defensive positions to repel the enemies, the doors crashed inwards and crushed a couple of the less alert root members. This left Torun down to only himself and 10 other root. That being said, Torun couldn't fully blame the 2 dead root members for being crushed by the large metal doors. The doors had after all been reinforced by a dual iron bar seal. Anyone capable of destroying them, even with repeated barrage, was a not force to trifle with. The power and strength it would take to so easily break through meant they were facing a potential S-class shinobi. Before the dust could clear, a black blur exploded forwards, a set of glowing red eyes clearly visible through the cloud of dust. What followed next was a sudden swish of metal followed by a gurgle and a sudden thud. A spatter of blood hitting the root Anbu as one of their number was instantly decapitated.
Make that 9 root anbu left. Torun thought as despondently as someone without emotions can. The other root anbu reacted instantly, 3 of them weaving through hand seals before bringing their hands to their mouth and sending forward a wave of fire at the entrance. The others all moving back and preparing for battle, taking note of the narrow corridor they were currently in.
Not that this did them any good, as a figure suddenly barreled through the intense flames, seemingly not affected by them, as he instead collided with the 3 shinobi. A clawed hand tore the throat out of the first shinobi, a blur of black metal cleaved another in 2, and the third shinobi received a clawed foot in the middle of the chest, shattering his ribs and pulverizing his organs. In a matter of moments all 3 of them were dead. Torun, seeing this, calmly raised his fist before commanding his men to retreat back into the base. This was a powerful opponent. The root shinobi did not excel at facing powerful opponents straight on. They were trained to be true shinobi after all. They were suited to fighting in the shadows using speed, skill and subtlety. The dark corridors deeper within the base would be much better terrain for them to face down and kill this new foe.
Torun himself also retreated deeper into the base, despite the fact that he knew that no matter how strong the individual was, one touch would be enough to end him. With that in mind, Torun shed his gloves and shirt, his skin taking on a vibrant shade of purple, not exactly as stealthy as one would like for a profession based on sneaking around, but its effectiveness more than made up for it.
One touch of the venomous insects crawling over his skin would put down any enemy. Of course, its lack of subtlety didn't matter, since if Torun had taken off his shirt and gloves, he wasn't trying to be stealthy. After all, someone would need to bait the enemy deeper into the base and get them in a position that would allow his other troops to act. The time had come to die for the mission if needed.
Turning to retreat into the base, Torun and the 6 remaining root anbu didn't get far as a sudden low whistling sound could be heard. The sound invading their inner ear and manipulating their senses. Before they knew it, the group found themselves, instead of retreating deeper into the base, instead running back at the entrance.
Wow, only 13 enemy shinobi. When Zaji said that this base was well defended, I thought he was serious. Their mystery attacker said as he stepped out of the settling dust cloud, a smaller figure visible drew the side of him, before with a blur it disappeared. It's a shame, I was looking forward to having a bit of fun. The man continued, a vicious grin on his face, as Torun felt something rising up within him, that he had never thought he would feel again: fear. Torun pushed that aside for now, instead pulsing his chakra and dispelling the genjutsu that had gotten them turned around. It was too late to retreat, as in the time it had taken for Torun to assess the situation and break the genjutsu, their opponent had already moved. His body a blur as he shot forward, the ground cratering slightly under his feet as he appeared in the midst of the group. His glowing red eyes standing out in the darkness. Reacting immediately, 2 of the root anbu drew swords and slashed at him, one from either side. It was useless though, as the silver-haired warrior avoided both blades with supernatural ease, weaving between their rapid thrusts and lunges. As he was doing this, one hand thrust out and closed around one of the root shinobi's heads, clamping shut like a voice and crushing his skull, a dull crack sounding as bone and mask alike broke. Whilst he was doing this, the blade in his other hand batted away his other opponent's strike and continued on through his throat, killing him in an instant. Grimacing, Torun darted forward towards his opponent, his 4 remaining subordinates at his side. That is, of course, until a high-pitched whistle sounded. Upon hearing it, Torun immediately fluctuated his chakra, leaping to the ceiling and attaching to it as he covered his ears with his hands. The other root shinobi were not so quick on the uptake. All 4 shinobi found their muscles seizing up, freezing their movements for a moment, making them stumble forwards. Before any of them could recover, a smaller figure detached themselves from the side of the darkened corridor. A lithe girl, with long black hair and a slight smile on her face as she darted forwards, a tanto in her hand as she hamstrung 3 of the shinobi before they even had a chance to recover. Her body low to the floor as she swept around, her tanto flashing again as it slit one of the shinobi's throats and dug into the side of another's forehead. The girl pulling the blade out as she rolled to the floor, avoiding a barrage of kunai from one of the now recovered shinobi, and a blast of condensed water from the hamstrung shinobi. Falling from the ceiling, Torun aimed to take the girl out whilst she was distracted. The wind whistling in his ears as he descended on her, his hand closing around the back of her before he used both his physical strength and momentum to slam her head into the ground. Or at least he thought he did, until her body dispersed into mist and a sudden gurgling sound made him look up. The hamstrung shinobi fell to the ground, A red smile opened up on his throat. The girl standing behind her bloody tanto in hand as she looked down at the surprised Torun. Another genjutsu. Torun muttered, his tone empty as he stood back up, a look of faint irritation on his face as he stood up, falling into a ready fighting stance.
The other remaining root Anbu also fell into a fighting stance, a tanto held in his hand. Take the girl, Torun said to his companion before he turned away to face off against the amused-looking man. Torun ran at his opponent as the other root member moved at the same time, heading for the confident-looking girl. As he charged in, Torun noticed that the man glanced over his shoulder, a slight smirk on his face as he made the mistake of looking over at the root Anbu charging his companion, taking his eyes off of Torun in the process.
The last mistake he'll ever make, Torun thought to himself as he rapidly got in close and went to punch his opponent across the exposed skin of the face, releasing his swarm of venomous bugs in the process. Instead of the fist making contact though, the silver-haired man reached up and caught the punch in a palm that didn't give an inch. His sharp nails piercing Torun's skin, and his grip cracked the bones in Torun's hand. As well as the sudden feeling of pain, what truly startled Torun was the fact that his opponent hadn't looked in his direction at all. Somehow I expected more. I mean, you are the one giving the commands, are you not? I would have thought that the leader of the group would be the most dangerous one. The silver-haired man said, a faint note of his appointment in his voice as he turned his glowing red eyes onto Torun. His sword held lazily at his side. As he saw the glowing red eyes, Torun felt another shiver of fear. Those eyes, it was like they could see through him. The feeling he got formed that made him know that they weren't natural. Still, though, that didn't matter. What did was that he had made contact with the man's flesh. The man was already dead, he just didn't know it yet. Ah well. Might as well finish it. Wait, what? The feral-looking man said in surprise as he looked at his hand. Torun grinned as he saw that his opponent wasn't wearing gloves. Even among the Aburame, Torun had been unique. He commanded a swarm of microscopic insects that inhabited his body. Through physical contact, he could infect his opponents with these insects, which were poisonous to everyone but himself. The insects would feed off the chakra of their opponents like regular parasitic insects, but the poison the bugs released was what killed them far faster than chakra exhaustion. The poison would take longer to spread if it started in the hand, and the limb could be amputated to remove the poison, but Torun had more or less won. Still, one didn't become one of Lord Danzo's most trusted by taking risks and assuming things. Torun swept out his tanto for a quick slice to the neck for the kill. His tanto made clean contact, but somehow failed to penetrate the skin. Not only that, the tanto shattered as if it were made of glass. An amused look crossing the man's face, his eyes becoming an amber color as he released Torun's hand and watched him jump back. His opponent's eyes became red once again and suddenly flashed with glee and challenge as he lashed out with his infected fist, driving his closed fist into Torun's stomach and sending him staggering backwards. Rather than follow through with his strike, the now red-eyed man then stared at his left hand in interest, an act which surprised Torun. He had been expecting horror and a sudden realization of impending doom. Torun had won after all. Then the strangest thing began to happen. The purple skin on the man's hand began to turn stone gray from the original point of contact and quickly spread, overtaking the microscopic insects. The poison had only spread halfway up the forearm before it stopped entirely. The silver-haired man idly shaking his gray hand, breaking a thin layer of actual stone that had formed over his left hand and forearm. The interest on his face turning into a smirk as the man looked up at Torun, smirking as the root Anbu took a couple of steps backwards. I take it you didn't know. Absorbing natural energy is dangerous for those untrained in its use, Torun's opponent said as he absent-mindedly as he brought his attention back to him. A smile passing over his face as he slashed his sword through the air before he darted forwards, not pausing for a second as he crossed the distance between them in moments. Luckily, Torun managed to use the replacement technique to switch with a log, the wood shattering into splinters of wood as the man tore through it. Not pausing for a second as he unerringly found Torun, charging forward and engaging the Aburame in close combat. As he did so, Torun unleashed his entire swarm, using the chakra-eating bugs as a distraction as he controlled them and made them swarm his attacker. Now any normal shinobi would try all the harder to overcome this foe, but shinobi trained as root Anbu weren't governed by their emotions. Torun knew when to cut his losses and inform Lord Danzo of his discoveries. Torun performed the body flicker technique to put as much distance between himself and the much stronger rogue shinobi that had attacked the base and butchered the rest of Torun's team. He had put enough distance between himself and the base that he felt safe tree jumping instead of using the body flicker. He was glad. The body flicker was known to aggravate injuries received. After all, he had a number of broken bones and damaged organs from fighting that monster of a shinobi. Torun didn't even wait long enough to see his fellow root shinobi cut down like a dog, the man's female opponent idly cleaning her blade as she stood over his dead body. Nor did he see the flash of irritation that passed through the silver-haired man's eyes as he fought through the swarm of toxic chakra-eating bugs.
No, instead Torun leapt into the surrounding forest, swiftly moving from tree to tree. As he did so, he was surprised to notice a large, white spider on one of the tree limbs he jumped past. Almost as if it responded to him noticing it, the spider jumped from its perch and latched onto his face. Right before the spider exploded, Torun heard the last words he would ever hear. With this, become art. Katsu. A few minutes later, an amused smirk passed of Deidara's face as he looked down at the last of the root shinobi. The one who had tried to flee only to have his head blown to pieces by his art. Looking up from the man's ruined remains, he instead looked over at the shattered remains of the enemy's base. The underground bunker now fully exposed, courtesy of his bombardment of explosives. Looking over at the shattered entrance to the bunker, he saw Kin and Naruto leaving the base, the two of them having likely wiped out all of the shinobi taking refuge within. As it turned out, the two of them weren't as hopeless as he had initially thought. Of course, in the end they still needed his help to kill the one that tried to get away. But still they were decent enough. Even if their fighting styles were crude and artless, they got the job done, and in the end that was all that matters. Who knows, he might let them tag along on his next job. Stepping of his flying clay bird as it descended to the ground, Deidara smirked slightly as he saw the other two approaching. Not bad for a single day's hard work, yeah. Naruto cocked an eyebrow as he heard that, before shrugging. I was expecting a bit more excitement. I think we've had enough excitement for the last few weeks. Now our job here is finished, can't wait to get back to some normal bounty hunting. Kin spoke up, sheathing her tanto and move so she was walking directly beside Naruto.
It wasn't that bad, Naruto replied, his tone softer than when he spoke to Deidara, a note of fondness in it.
For you it wasn't, you love roughing it in the wilds. Me, I prefer a bit of comfort now and then. Kin replied, a sour look on her face as she saw Naruto send her a grin.
Well, if you two love birds are finished, let's head back to the camp and inform them of our success. Deidara spoke up, an amused smirk on his face as he saw the both of them give him irritated looks.
Fine then, but you were going to give us a lift on your pigeon, Naruto said brusquely, making it clear that Deidara had no choice in the matter.
It's not a pigeon, it is a hawk, you cretin. Deidara snapped back. Really? Kin asked, furrowing her brow. Yes, Deidara snapped back. Think you might need some art lessons. Naruto replied bluntly, as he swept past Deidara. Fuck you, Deidara cursed, as he saw both Kin and Naruto mounting the clay hawk. Getting on it himself, as he willed it to lift off and begin flying them back to the army's camp. Before they could fully take off though, the bird exploded. All three of them leaping off before the bird exploded. Naruto scowled as he crashed onto the ground, his eyes narrowed as he instantly locked on the incredibly powerful chakra source that suddenly appeared in his vicinity. It appeared with no warning, like 1 minute it wasn't there, then the next it was. It was a man, a striking one at that, who the moment he showed himself caught the attention of all three of them. He had orange hair that blew slightly in the wind and dozens of black piercings across his face and arms. The other striking thing about him was the cloak he wore. It went from a high collar down to his ankles, colored black accented by blood-red clouds on the outside while the inside was the same color as the clouds. The man's sheer presence was overwhelming. Even Naruto, who was very confident in his skills and ability, knew that he couldn't take this man on right here and now. At least not until he knew just who and what he would be going up against. There was just something about him that inspired dread, as Naruto straightened himself, his sword in hand. He sensed Kin appear next to him, the girl obviously picking up some of the same thing Naruto was, though maybe not to the same degree. Either way, she obviously knew she was out of her depth. Who are you? Naruto asked bluntly, squaring himself as he moved so he was just shielding Kin. His amber eyes flashing to red as he activated his dojutsu, almost immediately being taken aback as he saw the sheer power this man exuded. Being able to see it was a lot more intense than just being able to feel it. The orange-haired man looked Naruto in the eyes as he heard that, revealing to Naruto for the first time the purple ripples that his eyes seemed to be made of. The eyes radiating with so much power, that for Naruto it looked like the man had two suns in his skull. It seemed the source of the man's power might be a set of dojutsu.
I am God. I am the one who will bring peace to this pathetic world. I am Pain. The man introduced himself, his voice deep, catching their attention immediately.
While the man's claim to be God was ridiculous, something about the way he carried himself and the power he exuded made Naruto wary. I am the leader of a group known as Akatsuki, comprised of a select group of powerful individuals. We cooperate for our own purposes, but my ultimate goal is to bring peace to this world. I am offering the two of you a place within the organization. Pain continued in a tone that brokered no argument.
Naruto's eyes narrowed as he heard that. And how would you go about doing that?
Peace shall be achieved through the Jinchuriki, or more specifically, the tailed beasts. Akatsuki shall hunt them down and capture, before controlling them to create an era of peace. Pain said with absolute conviction in his tone. Will you stand alongside us? So you are hiring people to hunt down Jinchuriki? Naruto asked in interest, ignoring the fact that he himself was one. After all, his constant use of Sage Mode allowed him to complete mask the Biju sealed within him. Instead he focused on the chances this opportunity held, if he took this pawn up on his offer. Yes, now will you join me? Pain asked, his ringed purple eyes locked on Naruto's own. To be continued. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.